This is The Neutral Position, hosted by Nick Palmisano, bringing honesty and reason back into conversation. Here's your host, Nick Palmisano.
Hey guys, welcome to The Neutral Position. It is an honor to have legendary Night Stalker, Alan Mack Daddy Mack, on today. I don't know if he's ever been called that before. I'm just assuming he has because it is the most basic possible nickname.
Yes.
Thanks so much for being on, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and it was a pleasure getting from New York down to here. So I was an Army helicopter pilot. I served a little over 35 years, 11 months.
That's a long time.
If you're counting.
That's like 1.5 Julius.
But, you know, it was really 2 careers because I did 9 years enlisted as an aircraft mechanic before I went to flight school. So it's, just so completely different that it's like 2 separate careers.
What made you make that decision?
It started with the Be All You Can Be commercials in the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
There was a couple helicopter ones that I really enjoyed. And also the Vietnam War was toward the end, right? It was on the evening news every night. And you always saw a Huey flying by, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And so when it came time to, go to college, I decided I would be too much of a partier. And a friend of mine had been to the Army recruiter. So I was like, I think I'd like to fly helicopters, right? So they say you can do it right out of high school. So I go to the recruiter. I'm like, hey, I want to fly helicopters. He's like, well, pump the brakes turbo. It doesn't work that way. I'm like, I saw the commercial. It does.
I saw the Huey. I know you have helicopters.
Yeah. And he goes, look, join as an aircraft mechanic. Learn the lingo, the culture, learn some things, grow up a little bit, and then put in. He says, much easier to get in. Now, what I didn't know is he didn't get credit for warrant officers, but he did get credit for enlisted guys.
Yeah.
But it turned out it was good advice.
Was any part of what he was telling you true, or was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
So it wasn't like a straight up lie.
No. It definitely was tilted in his favor.
Yeah.
But it worked to my benefit.
So what year did you enter the military?
1980.
That is wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. 1980.
Yeah.
Hollywood had already left the military, 40, 50 years prior to that?
That's true.
I haven't done it in a while. I haven't done it in a
I've been
while.
missing it, bro. I just called you up when you were in Farmwood. It's like, hey, man, I'm feeling kind of young.
I'm feeling young. Can you make me? So dead center in the middle of the Cold War.
Yeah.
So we haven't had anybody on to talk about that. So before we get into all the cool, crazy stuff that you did, Cold War, like prime Cold War, Rocky IV is going to come out in a couple of years. What was it like to be in the United States military during that period of time?
Yeah, that's a good question because
that's what I bring to the table.
That's what you do. Good questions. So there's 2 things, right? So I'll tell you first about Korea, right?
Mm-hmm.
South Korea.
I hear that place has soul.
It does have soul. It
so
does.
bad.
And better now than it was what I'm going to tell you. So in the late 70s, their president was assassinated, right? And the country was run by a military junta. And when I was there in 1982, every major intersection in the towns and cities had military at checkpoints, right? There was no police. It was all military, right? And you could not have a personal car. It was all cabs. You had green cabs and yellow cabs, right? One was run on propane and the other was gas. And that was it, right? So then...
Was there a status associated with either one? Like you had to...
No, it's just
But
one
it's
was...
just- yeah.
It's a cab.
Interesting.
And, as a young enlisted guy, all we did was go down to the Ville and party, right?
Yep.
But with that being said, I go back as a pilot in 94, right? So the Olympics had already happened in 88, I think it was. And they now had a civilian government. They were no longer a military junta. And the difference was amazing. You no longer had military checkpoints. It was police officers. People had private cars, which the infrastructure couldn't handle, because all of a sudden everybody just could have cars,
Yep.
And a 40-minute to Seoul from Osan, turned out to be a 4 or 5 hour trip.
Just because the roads were so
Yeah.
good.
So, I'm sure they've improved a little bit, but it was really nice to see the change, because back in the early days, everything was, the rice paddies were all feces. There was no trees because the Japanese had basically deforested it in World War II. And they had a big Arbor Day was a big deal there. The soldiers would go out and we'd all plant trees. So here I get to see, several years later, these trees,
The trees
we
that you
planted
planted
are there.
That's cool.
So that's Korea. Now you go to Germany, right? So
Yeah.
I was in West Germany in the 80s.
Whereabouts?
Mannheim.
Okay.
So before the wall came down.
Yeah.
And one of the cool things with that,
What year was that?
so 85 to 89 is when I was there.
So during that period of time, I was, or for some of that period of time, I was in Italy.
Oh yeah,
The beginning of that period. Yeah.
nice.
As a kid, my dad, as a GS guy, was in Naples, and so I flew to Germany for ear surgery that I ended up not having. So just wanted to connect there.
Would
for
you
a
go
minute,
like
see
Heidelberg or something like that?
I think we flew into Berlin, if I remember correctly. I was little, so
Oh,
I
yeah.
think we flew into Berlin. I think that's where the ear doctor was.
Oh,
That could do
likely.
the but they were.
Well,
like,
the cool thing with Berlin is that obviously you had the Berlin Wall and Checkpoint Charlie, right? So
Yeah.
you had to go there as a U.S. soldier. Well, any of the four major Allied powers, you could go into East Berlin, and you had to go through Checkpoint Charlie, right? So to go first, you had to go through Checkpoint Bravo, right? So Bravo is somewhere in East Germany there along the highway, and we rented a Winnebago. This was like Stripes. I mean, we had the urban assault vehicle,
Yeah.
and it was a Mercedes actually, but I'll call it a Winnebago.
Yeah.
And it was me and a bunch of guys. I was an E6, and I was the senior guy. And we drive in, and we got all kinds of pokey bait with us, little trade material, insignia, unit crest, that kind of stuff. And so, of course, we pull up to the guard shack, and there's this Soviet soldier standing there. Right, it wasn't even East German; it was Soviet. And we're like holding stuff up in the window, and he's at attention. He's shaking his head no, and he kind of points up at a camera with his thumb. We're like, all right. So we go in, and we turned out we had all of our meals in East Berlin because it's still German food, still German beer. You're just on the other side of the wall. And we tried to talk some people into coming out with us. They were like, not doing it, because we're all drunk. And we're like, come on, you got to be back. Anyway, but it was a great time over there. And I bought a couple of pellet rifles, of all things, in East Berlin, which was a big deal. But you couldn't get ammunition. You couldn't get the pellets. So they'd sell you like a packet of like 50, and that was it. And I was like, no, I want to buy more. And they're like, no, then nobody else can have any. Because the shelves would go empty for like a month, right?
Yeah.
And then they'd restock them.
Yep.
And so then on the way back out, it's like 2 a.m, and we hit Checkpoint Bravo, and that same Soviet soldier is standing there, except he's got a big smile on his face, right? Because he remembers the Winnebago, right? So he come up and he grabs his belt buckle and he just kind of flips it like that, and we're like, oh, he wants to trade, right? So we pull up and he has to walk around the thing to check on it, and one of the guys steps out with a BDU cap, right? And it's full of the rank insignia, all that kind of pins, and he hands back a little baggie full of stuff. So I've got this Soviet hat pin, from the bus driver hat, those big oversized hats they wore. And he goes back to his shack and he looks at what we gave him and he just smiles and gives us a thumbs up.
That's cool.
That was pretty cool.
That's really
then,
cool.
Then I go to flight school and the wall comes down.
People forget, like, especially like now with everything that's going on, people forget that when you're talking about individual human beings, we're all very much the same. I right after the end of the Soviet Union, I went to Russia for a few months as part of the Eisenhower program, and that's where you essentially exchange kids, high school kids, or I think there's even a college version of it where you spend time and the whole intent from President Eisenhower was that you would see that if you meet individuals when you're young, before all the biases are put into you, you'd be less likely to then later as a leader, drag people into war without thinking it through. And so, I had a very positive experience in Russia and Ukraine. And then in Kosovo, I had the first shared mission with Russia since World War II. Wow. It was a checkpoint right on the Serb border. And so, I've had these positive, relationships with Russia. It doesn't change the fact that Russia's wrong now, but that's not on the individual Russian. You know what I mean? Like
Well, can I tell you a story? So
your story's going to be better than mine. I know.
No, it's not.
I know
it's
that.
Not.
You just
But-
want to
well,
put me down on my own show.
You might like this. So we're when I was in the 160th, we would do all of our training in real environments. Meaning, you know, if you're going to do desert mountain, you're going to go do your thing, right? So we're out in Albuquerque, and we're staying.
Before you keep going,
Yeah.
tell everybody what the 160th is and what a Night Stalker
Okay,
is.
don't let me forget a story about the.
I'm not going to let you forget. We're going to come right back.
All right. So the 160th Special Operations
Julie, it's
Aviation
your job
Regiment.
to make sure we don't forget.
Okay.
Yeah. So the 160th SOAR, right? Special Operations Aviation Regiment is the Army's only special aviation operations unit. Anyway, it works for all of the what we call customers. You know, Delta, Dev Group, this regular SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, and we are their primary ride. We're the taxi drivers for all of the pipe swingers, and you know, one of the things that's really cool about it is a volunteer unit, obviously in a volunteer military, and it's, you know, selection. You have to go try out for them. And they pick you or not. You have to have a certain level of experience when you get there. You know, flight time, goggle experience, that kind of stuff.
What percentage of that is just craziness? So if it was like skill versus craziness ratio, what would you put it at?
You know, it could go either way. It depends who the assessment people are, right? So
Okay.
there's a little of both, and I'll tell you why. Because most of the Chinook pilots in the 160th, for example, are former operators. So they're typically Rangers who got tired of wearing a rucksack.
Really?
And they go to flight school, and they, because of their background, they end up, you know, they will take them younger than if they were just a straight up pilot. Like I was just a regular pilot and an aircraft mechanic, so I had to have, you know, the full blown, you know, at least 1,500 hours, you know, 500 hours of goggles, you know, that kind of stuff. These guys have flight school time, you know, like 200 hours. And
Why is that?
because if you can take a small amount of guys that don't have a lot of experience in flying, and that's what we call monkey skills, right? We can teach a monkey to fly, right? So monkey skills, no big deal. But understanding the mission, right? Understanding the concept of supporting the unit the way we do is very important.
Gotcha.
So the Rangers have that, you know, you smash, Hulk smash, you know, kind of mindset.
Yep.
You know, we had SEALs come over. We had a lot of Delta guys. You know, usually it's when they either get too senior and they don't get a key leadership position. They go, you know, I'll go fly
They
helicopters.
don't want to be staff or
Yeah.
go to the regular
Right, or they
military.
blow out a knee or
Yeah,
something. We had a lot of professional athletes actually that had injuries. We had a couple of Major League Baseball players. We had a football player played for the Giants. He was my combatives buddy.
That's
You know,
tough.
he had a neck like this, and
That's
we were doing like,
tough.
you know, brachial stuns and
That's-
stuff. And
when you have high level, I mean, just when you have high level athletes, and even if they don't know anything, and you go and try to train, like, you know, grappling with them, it's not that you can't like deal with it, but it is a different level of intensity that they bring just because they know how to use their body.
yeah, and they're good under pressure,
They're
which
good.
is is nice.
Yeah.
We had a guy. He pitched for the Astros, and he joined the Army right about the time dodgeball came out. Now this guy threw in the like 100-mile-an-hour
Yeah.
fastball,
Yeah.
right? And he's throwing 90-mile-an-hour dodgeball, knocking
Yep.
people out. It's like, oh, he can't play anymore.
That was a classic movie.
Yeah,
that
it
that
shows.
That was definitely
Yeah.
that was definitely an Army like pre-game before you go out watching movie right there.
Yeah, we used to watch the Lonely Island stuff. You know, Andy Samberg.
Yep. So, we were going to get back, or you were going to tell your story now that we've talked about
Oh yeah.
the night. Julia
Right.
wasn't on that one.
Well,
She
no,
was
you
supposed
said
to.
1/16th, but I don't think you explained Night Stalker.
Yeah. Okay. So the Night Stalkers were invented, if you will, right after Desert One. So that was 1979, the Iranian hostage crisis. So they put an ad hoc task force together with, Delta Force was the assault force. You had the Air Force with C-130s, and then the helicopters. Originally, they wanted Chinooks. They thought that was the most appropriate for the mission, but because of OPSEC, the blades on a Chinook don't fold like a 53 do, and they were afraid that putting Chinooks on an aircraft carrier at the time would be a spike in OPSEC, right? So that people would know something's going on. So, I mean, they didn't think they could just fly on, after they got out of sight of land,
Yeah.
But this is all stuff, in the 80s, or 1980. And so it's a utter failure, right? The helicopters end up running into a C-130 that had fuel on it because they were refueling Desert One. So they create the Task Force 160th, right, which is elements of the 101st. There was a National Guard unit that had OH-6s from Vietnam, and they mix this all together and make the Task Force 160. And when the hostages were released, before they got to go after them, the Army Chief of Staff, I can't remember, it might have been General Meyer, said, you know what, we're going to keep this in place. This is a good thing, right? So now you have these relationships, right, which is very important. Which comes into play later on. I'll tell you about, you got a reputation with the customers, a good one, and life is good. You get a bad one, and you don't last long in the organization.
Literally true in everything.
Yeah, and so that's what really it is. And to this day, they fly 3 different airframes. They have Chinooks, which you can see on the book here. Right, it's a big, dumpster with 2 palm trees, having sex, or the SEALs call it the black school bus of death. But there's that. Then you have Black Hawks. You have an armed and an assault version. The armed version I love. It's called the DAP, Direct Action Penetrator. And then you have the Little Birds, MH and AH-6, right? An assault version and an attack version. And they're in Fort Campbell is where you have all of them. And then Savannah, Georgia, and Fort Lewis, Washington, there's Chinooks and Black Hawks. And that's the organization.
And then what was your specialty inside of that?
So I was an MH-47 pilot. We did what we call heavy assault, right? So in the conventional Army, Chinooks generally just fly cargo. In the 160th, we generally fly, special operators. And whether that's landing what we call to the X, which is on the objective next to the building, to the Y, which is within 300 meters, supposed to be outside of effective rifle range, and then offset, which is 300 meters to 10 kilometers away, and they walk in. And so I was a flight lead. So I would be the guy that led those flights, planned the flights, and it was a really good job.
So here's the real question. Why is there no movie about you guys that isn't terrible?
Oh, Black Hawk Down wasn't too bad.
You guys got shot down and like a bunch of people
All right. Well, what about Firebirds? That was amazing.
Firebirds with Sean Young and Tommy Lee Jones.
So
Nick Cage, right?
So I am the greatest.
That was horrible.
So it was horrible. So the only saving grace was that G.I. Jane came out at the same time frame, right?
Oh, so that no one paid attention to Firebirds.
No, they did. The SEALs anyway. So I'm in Kandahar with.
That was a rough year for the SEALs.
Oh, God. The SEALs were my customer one night. We're doing a mission, and we break 2 aircraft, and we're waiting to get them fixed, right? And they're like, "Come on, let's just go." And I'm like, "No, we hit Minforce." And so they're like, "Oh, is this like Firebirds? We could watch that tonight." And I just looked at the SEALs and I was like, "Really? I just watched G.I. Jane last night. I don't think it's so bad." Like, screw you.
I can't believe you even mentioned Firebirds, Alan.
Oh, it's a horrible movie. I know.
Somebody should make a good Night Stalkers movie.
They should.
They should. There really needs to be one. That's not a low budget film.
No.
Well, that is a.
Well, even
we need
in
Tom Cruise to do it.
Even in Horse Soldiers or 12 Strong.
Yep.
The Chinook scenes that was supported by the 160th,
Mm-hmm.
but all of the really good scenes I thought were cut. So if you look in the deleted scenes, you see a lot more Chinook stuff. But
is there a director's cut that has all of it in?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
There should be.
You got to make it happen.
Yeah, I know. There should be a movie about this. Maybe Diesel Jack will make a movie.
I mean, I would love to do it, but we're probably talking. What do you think? What do you think the budget is on that guy?
180.
Oh, you think it's that big?
I mean, because of all the flying, if you're going to make it realistic.
We need Tom Cruise to play you. That's what we need.
Yep.
Well,
he needs to get on board with
my
it.
wife says it has to be.
After this,
My wife says Miles Teller.
Oh yeah.
Well, but he's got to have a. But he.
not near handsome enough.
Well, he just got to grow a big mustache. I mean,
Yeah.
I no longer have the mustache, but
Yeah.
I was known for this big bushy mustache that the crew chief said told me how to fly.
Yeah.
They said it would talk like Zoidberg, from Futurama. It'd be like,
mustaches were big in the 80s. Like my dad's still sporting his 80s mustache. He's riding it out.
I would, but it's all white now. And,
I got you. I got you.
So.
Back to Russia.
Back to Russia.
Oh, yeah.
See?
Thank
Look
you.
at that.
You're
Look at that.
welcome.
My mom's going to be so happy.
So we're talking about, the relationships of people,
Yep.
not necessarily Soviet Union or
Yeah.
Russia, right? So we're out in Albuquerque doing our desert and mountain training. And we come back from a night flight, change clothes. We're going to go out. A friend of mine, the other flight lead, we'll call him Arlo. We go out there and we're going to smoke a cigar, and we've got a bottle of bourbon, right? So we're just going to enjoy the night. And the students, in the dust landings, they kind of, all right, we survived. It's like teaching your teenager how to drive, but worse. And there's this big fat guy sitting at the pool in a Speedo, right? And he's just sitting there all night, right? And
I think comfort with Speedo is directly proportional to weight. Like the bigger you are, the more you're like, that Speedo's looking good,
I think so.
I've never seen like outside of like Europe, like Italy or something.
And in Europe, and Europe.
Outside of like Italy, or France, I've never seen
Well,
thin dudes.
He was
sporting
obviously,
Speedos.
European of some sort, right?
Yeah.
So my buddy, Arlo had, in between his time active and now he was a contractor doing instruction, he worked in Kazakhstan teaching, flight over there. So he spoke a little bit of Russian. So he walks up, says something to him, I don't know. And it turns out the guy's locked out of his room, but he doesn't know what to do. So Arlo takes him to the front desk in his Speedo, gets him a new key. He goes in, lets him in a room, which is right by the pool.
Yeah.
And he comes out with a bottle of vodka, and he's now dressed in regular clothes.
Yep.
And it's got like a wax seal on it. And this is real Russian vodka, right?
Yeah.
So he cuts it with a knife, and he pops the top off, and he plops on the table, and he goes like this, which means that bottle's going to be empty. You can't put the top back on, right? So like, right? So we drink that bottle of vodka with him.
Yeah.
And then he goes and gets another one.
Oof.
And we're like, are we flying tomorrow? Nope, we're off. All right, let's do it, right? Sun's coming up, and just had a really good time with him. We ended up using some kind of translator app, plus Arlo could speak a little bit. But he was just a lot of fun. And it turns out he was a Russian general. And they were there at Kirtland Air Force Base doing some type of, exchange program, where they'd come learn how does the U.S. military do this kind of thing?
Yeah.
Obviously they didn't learn too much. I thought they did.
Yeah, they did a poor job learning.
But anyway, he was a lot of fun, nice guy, as a person.
Yeah.
So, and who knows what he was like, but that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is like over and over again, I'm sure you've been to even more places, but I've been to, we're knocking on the door of like 50, 57 or 56. I don't know. High number of countries, and like individual people are generally the same.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like regardless of like religion or it's like, people kind of they want to do their thing. They want their family to be okay. They want like it's when you put people in groups that they get stupid.
Yeah,
and I mean, I have not seen that rule broken yet, but. Unfortunately, we don't control the groups. We just do our best. So Cold War, you served throughout the entire Cold War. I mean, essentially, and then Desert Storm kicks off.
Yeah.
Talk about that, because I think a lot of people that are younger now don't remember. That kind of Desert Storm kind of faded into,
right.
The background.
Yeah. So I graduated flight school. I got a Chinook transition immediately, and I was lucky to get that because in those days, Chinook pilots were all older, people who had been in Vietnam, and this was like a reward was to fly the Chinook.
Yeah.
But they were all retiring at the same time, just like the airlines now, right? So they said, all right, what are we going to do? We'll take guys out of flight school, which was unheard of. So when I got to my unit right after that, there was only 2 W1s, right? And in the Warrant Officer Corps, you have W1 through 5, and W1, we call them Wojs, Warrant Officer Junior. kind of thing. And I get there, and you're the guy that empties the trash and, stocks the fridge, that kind of stuff. But in this case, Saddam had just invaded Kuwait, and we got notified. It was in the 18th Airborne Corps. Our headquarters was at Bragg. I was in Savannah, Georgia, and we got notified we were going to go for Desert Shield, which is, a defensive operation to keep Saddam from coming into the kingdom, right? So we fly up to Wilmington, North Carolina from Savannah, put our aircraft on a ship. They bubble wrap them, and off they go. Right? It's going to be like a month, maybe 2 to get there. So we get to Saudi Arabia ahead of them. And what was interesting about it is, we immediately started, as the forces rolled in, we started hauling cargo, ammunition, food, water, tank transmissions, treads, all that kind of stuff. And because the flying was so severe, the dust landings and the dunes and stuff, the old guys didn't want to do it. These are guys that were in Vietnam, and they're like, you know what, I don't want to do this crap again. Let the Woj go, right? So they just stuck me with an instructor, and I flew every mission you can think of. I wasn't up in front. I was usually in a trail bird, just learning, and flying. And that's how I got, so much night vision goggle time right up front, which is interesting because you got to put Desert Storm and Desert Shield in perspective, in that at the time, the Army would say, we own the night. Well, we didn't. We
borrowed the night.
We rented it, is what we used to say. Because, guys would go out to the National Training Center, Fort Irwin, California, and they'd fly at night, and it's in the desert, right? But it's a different kind of desert. Everybody thinks one desert is the same as the next, and they are not, as you know. So Fort Irwin is like scrubby rock. There's a lot of definition, and you can see that with night vision goggles. You go to Saudi Arabia, and it's these smooth dunes, right? Like you see in Lawrence of Arabia, and you can't see the differences in elevation. And one of the problems they had there was, the dune would come up, and you'd see that, but then there'd be a secondary lip that was in the shadow, and you didn't see that. And helicopters were running into that top lip because guys were trying to fly low, and they thought they were flying low over the first thing, and they'd hit the second. And so we had Hueys over there, a couple of aircraft. Nobody died, but they damaged a lot of aircraft, landing gear, and skids. So
you flying NVGs only? Because there was no TFR on those birds, right?
At night, right? Yeah. And the Hueys didn't have a radar altimeter.
Tell everybody, Hollywood just yelling pilot. He's a pilot. You should know that.
Yeah.
So he's yelling pilot stuff in the background. So talk about what he just said.
Yeah. So in the 160th, the MH-47, right? Every Army helicopter has a designation: UH for utility, CH for cargo, AH for attack. And in the 160th, they're all MHs, meaning they're modified helicopters. And the Chinooks,
very nebulous.
Yeah.
Right. Very gray.
Now I'm
modified how? We don't know.
And sometimes, we don't know. Because they'd give you equipment, and the procurement works so fast in development. Sometimes they'd give you a piece of equipment and there'd be no instructions.
They wouldn't tell you what it is.
And be like, no, you'd be like, all right, there's the radar. How do I work it? We don't know. Here. Eventually they'd give you
figure it out. Yeah.
But unfortunately, the 160th is the innovators for night vision flying, or flying at night anyway. And there's a memorial wall at the regiment. I don't remember how many names are on it. I should know. But there's a lot. And most of them come from aircraft crashes in learning how to fly with night vision goggles, right? So, things like wires across rivers and things like that. So there's an organization in the 160th called SIMO, Systems Integration Maintenance Office, and they are like the skunk works on a minor scale, right? So they would do things like, well, how can we fly at night safer? So they'd come up with things like the terrain following radar. So there were aircraft out there, the B-1, I think the F-16 had a lantern radar, which is what they modified for the Chinook, and you could fly. MC-130s, you have the Talons, had those. And the idea is you can fly at 100, 300, or 500 feet above the terrain without being able to see out the window, right? And so that was a progression, an evolution in night flying. And in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, we didn't have that especially in the conventional forces. So what we did is they set a hard deck. They said you could fly no lower than 150 feet, right? And nowadays you set what we call bitch and Betty. You know, it's because she'll bitch at you, altitude low. And, you know, and if you ignore her, she gets louder, right? So what we did is we put a guy in the jump seat. So the jump seat, you have two pilots, and just behind and between them is what we call the troop commander seat on the jump seat. And there would be a third pilot there, and he would just watch the radar altimeter. And if you got below 150, he'd squawk at you, hey, come up, you're too low. But once with the hostilities kicked off, we didn't have enough pilots to do that. So everybody had to just suck it up and not crash. Wow. But, you know, dust landings were terrible. We didn't have any way of seeing out the window because the dust comes up in this big cloud, right? And the conventional Chinooks, even the Special Operations Chinooks at the time, didn't have what we call hover symbology, which is a little video game you play to keep the aircraft doing what you want it to do when you can't see out the window. And, you know, you'd land in the dust. Now, this is what happened in Desert One. You know, the helicopter pilots couldn't see in the dust, and they had the loadmaster from the C-130s were out there with the lighted wands like you see at the airport. And they're, you know, ground guide him, come up, you know, go this way. And then the guy stuck them in his back pocket, didn't realize they were still on, and walked up the ramp with the C-130, and the helicopter pilot just followed the wands. And that's how they...
Because there was dust kicked up.
Oh, yeah.
And they couldn't see, so you lost the visual reference.
Right.
And that's why it's hard to hover. Before the hover page came up, you're trying to hover visually, you lose your visual cues, and now you're drifting and you don't even realize it because you can't, you have no ground reference.
Right. And
We get it, Hollywood. You're a pilot.
No, it's hard. It's hard.
it is.
I
Yeah.
don't know how the helicopter guys do it.
We should change the show to the neutral position with Hollywood Hurd.
Yeah, I won't
I'm just messing with you, man. I'm just messing with you, man.
I tried to.
I just-
hover a
you're just-
helicopter in a clear blue sky and couldn't do it. I
You're-
can't imagine doing it in the dust.
You're just so excited about this because we got a pilot on. You know, you're all fired up.
Yeah, well, what he did is it's black magic. It's unbelievable what these guys.
Well, we call it PFM, pure freaking magic.
frickin'.
I'm trying to keep it clean. So, yeah, it's usually the other word. But so I tell you the shortcomings, because when Desert Storm ended, you know, we had 100 hours of actual conflict, which was pretty darn quick.
Yep.
And when we came back to the States, the Army was like, all right, we will own the night, right? Even the conventional forces. So everything we did, whether it was...
Or at least lease it. You know, we're going from a
it's a
rental agreement to like a long-term lease.
Rent to own.
Yeah.
Really is what it is. And they, every big exercise you did, they wanted goggle crews, right? So out of a 16-ship company, we only had 6 crews that could fly goggles. Everybody else sort of didn't maintain currency. They just were qualified in it. But once again, it's these old guys, they didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And they'll let the younger guys do it. And I didn't know any better. And quite frankly, I was having fun. So that's how I got all my goggle time, was everywhere we went. And it did improve. I mean, you know, the goggles improved themselves. You know, I think the original goggles we had were 2050 visual acuity, which is terrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although unaided flight's 2200. So it's virtually blind. And they just got better and better and better. And then I went off to Korea, did an assignment as a unit trainer. We fly the border and fly at night, all that kind of stuff.
So that was post Desert Storm.
Post Desert Storm. And the Army just made a big, big effort in flying at night.
Before we leave Desert Storm, because I
Mm-hmm.
talk about this all the time, how did it feel to execute that mission, especially on the heels of, you know, Vietnam and the things that our military had kind of dealt with? To have a mission like Desert Storm.
It felt good. You know, it was, well, first of all, we thought we were protecting the Saudi kingdom, which felt good to keep Saddam out of there. And then to liberate Kuwait, you know, it felt good. You know, I mean, these assholes come in and tear that place up, and they're shooting people against the wall. I mean, all the terrible things they did. And we drive them out of there. And then, as I've heard you say often, and then we left.
Yep. Right?
Which is kind of
Yep.
you had an exit strategy.
Yep.
Right? Which we see is kind of important. And in contrast, we did a victory parade in D.C., right? Schwarzkopf and the group come marching down, the thing. I stood static display on the National Mall, with a Chinook, and it felt really good,
And and you've heard me talk about it, but I really think that was like the dream team of leaders that had all learned the right lessons from Vietnam. You had a president that was a veteran that did not want a prolonged conflict without a end state. You had Colin Powell, you had Schwarzkopf, you had a group of people that understood, like, hey, let's go.
And they followed, I think it was called the Weinberger doctrine, right? Under Reagan, Caspar Weinberger came up with the 4 key things but the big thing was you had to have an exit strategy, which is funny because, so I work in public safety now, with the emergency services. And one of the tenets of that is when you, when something happens, a disaster, and you mobilize, one of the very first things that you start to do is planning to demobilize. You already are planning how are we going to get out of this? So you're responding to it, but at the same time, you're trying to figure what's the end state.
Yeah. How do we hand this off?
Right.
And
combat should be the same way. You've got to have, all right, here's the end state. I'm skipping ahead here, but, in 2001, when we went to Uzbekistan and then Afghanistan, we always thought we were going to be home by November. And it wasn't until,
nobody expected it, 20 years.
I mean, our organization isn't meant for long-term deployments. It's go strike somebody and come home and get ready for the next one. And in this case, it just went on and on and on. And we always thought, we were going to get bin Laden, which we can talk about later, but which is why I stayed, doing it so long, is we always thought we were going to get that bastard. But,
yeah.
Do helicopter pilots have call signs?
Some do. Well, Razor 03
okay.
is in the beginning of the war, you had to have, a call sign, right? So they give you a computer-generated sheet of all these call signs, and you get to pick, right? So we're sitting in there, and as we're going down, ooh, Razor, that sounds cool, right? So we picked Razor for us, and our DAPs, the actual cool guys, the armed Black Hawk guys, were not in the room, so we picked Sponge for them, right? And so they come in and they're like, "Hey, did you guys pick the call signs?" Yeah, they gave them to us.
Yeah, we didn't get to pick. They just gave them to us.
We're Razors 1 through 4, and they're like, well, what are we? I'm like, Sponge 1 through 3.
You're Mr. Pink.
Yes, yeah, it's just like they're like, well, how come I can't be like Crusher or something? Well, it was already taken. There's a guy in Kuwait called Crusher.
Yeah, you're Sponge.
Yeah. So and the reason they did it,
who put Sponge on the list?
Well, it's just computer generated. These are they call them VCSLs, variable call signs.
Yeah, but still, I mean, I feel like
even
though the computer generated it, you can be like, let's remove.
Well,
Sponge.
and some of them aren't even phonetically pronounceable. Like you'd get one and it was like, I can't even use that, right? So I would use in later years, I picked up the nickname Cougar from the movie Top Gun.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
The guy that freaked out, It's like, oh, he turned in his wings, So I had moved up from a different job, and the crew chiefs were making fun of me.
How do you feel about Cougar? Let's get a real pilot's perspective.
Well, first of all, anybody puts a picture of their loved one in the dashboard,
that's crazy, right? Yeah, that's a movie thing that
I've never seen anybody. Actually, I did see one guy do that in Desert
I've seen
Storm.
people put them in the hat.
Yeah,
in the hat.
I didn't want anything personal on me.
You just want it to be all.
Yeah. Well, we were, especially when we went over in the beginning of the GWAT, we went completely sterile, so there was nothing on us that, indicated really who we were, kind of stuff. And then it morphed a little bit, but I talk about in the book.
Which, by the way, this book is not just sitting here, for no reason. Alan wrote this book, and it's crushing it.
And it's good.
And he did that without a large publisher. He's got a cool indie publisher that's doing a great job with him. But he has sold over 10,000 books already. You guys should check this out. It is wild. It's a wild ride. And now back to you, Alan.
All right. Thank you for the commercial. That's awesome. Diesel Jack Media.
Right. Thanks, man. Oh, look at that. Look at that.
Hyping up the book.
Look at that.
I appreciate it. And what was I saying?
See that right there? What just happened was the the predator handshake. That's what we
It's
just did. Just
it's
did
a little bit of
verbally.
symbiosis there, right? But I forgot what I was saying.
Some people put their pictures.
Oh
in
yeah,
hats or
right.
something, yeah.
So one of the crew chiefs on Operation Anaconda, so we had Razors 1 through 7 by then, right? So I was the lead element of 2, Razor 3 and Razor 4, and then Razor 1 and Razor 2 were the quick reaction force with the Rangers. My job in Anaconda was the HVT guy, if you will. So I had a high value target. So the reason they even did Anaconda was they thought Zawahiri and bin Laden had come back into the country and they were in the Gardez area. So they planned this big operation, and it was a conventional forces. But once they decided that bin Laden might be there, they added us. So I had a SEAL Team 6 element as we were going to go schwack him if he popped up. And Razor 01 and 02 were the QRF, the quick reaction force.
Got it.
So if I launched and got in trouble, they would come save me, kind of thing. And then the other Razors were doing some stuff to help put special forces teams on the mountaintops to look down in the valley and call for fire. And I forgot where I was even going with that. That's what happens when you expand too much, But
we do that. We try to make guests forget things.
And I'm terrible.
So that we just
as I get a little older,
float through.
Yeah.
And Quigley's supposed to keep people on target, but as you can tell, she's not great at her job.
Yeah, but we were talking about the call signs, I think, really, right?
Yeah, Nick asked about what you think of Cougar. And
Yeah,
we were talking about Cougar. Yeah.
So I ended up using it after that, but it was.
Let me put it a different way.
Yeah.
Assessing the Top Gun pilots,
Right.
best to worst, and just the ones you can remember.
Oh.
Who is start with the worst? Who's the worst pilot?
Oh, Cougar.
Cougar's the worst?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he flipped out because the guy got close to him.
Okay, Cougar is the worst.
Yeah.
All right, then who?
Well, Hollywood. Right? Or was he?
Where'd he
Rio?
go? Where'd he go?
Which reminds me of, every time I think of that, I think of 1941 with the Japanese submarine.
And Slim Pickens is on the
Yeah.
Periscope. Hollywood!
Yeah, you got to make these radios smaller.
All right, so Cougar, Hollywood, then who?
Oh,
We don't have to remember all of them.
I don't remember
Let's-
the other names.
we
There's
got
there's
Will
big
Smith.
guy, little guy.
Are we only doing the original Top Gun? Or are we including?
No, then we
Should
get
we include
the new one
everybody?
too. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, Iceman was good, but he wasn't flexible enough. That's the problem.
So you think Iceman wasn't the best?
No,
Because there is an argument to be made that he was the
I
best
think he was
pilot.
technically the better pilot, but he had ice water in his veins, right? Iceman. But sometimes you got to have a little spunk in you.
You need to do something a little crazy.
Yeah,
So
I mean
who's
that's the kind of thing that I look at with being a flight lead in the 160. There's only very few of us, and I joke that I'm the best of them. I wasn't, but I was definitely probably the most aggressive of the 47 flight leads, and that's why I would come overseas and the customers would be waiting for me. Meaning the supported unit, they'd be like, Al, we were waiting for you. We got some missions. I'm like, great, But it's because I would do things kind of a little, more like Maverick, if you will.
So do you think Maverick is the best pilot?
All right, we'll say yes.
Say yes.
Yes.
So here's
I mean,
my
he
other
did
question.
get that F-14 off the ground.
Which I know when I saw that, I mean, like even watching it, I was like rolling my eyes, like this is so ridiculous, but also I still loved it.
Mav, why are the wings? Why are the wings coming out?
I loved Top Gun Maverick because it reminded me of an '80s movie.
Yeah.
And then I am so tired of being depressed by movies, or being lectured in movies.
It was fun. I mean, it was just a fun movie.
I want to be entertained.
Yeah. Although he could have put the flaps down on it.
So here's a question. I know naval aviators are a different kind of weird, but how accurately do you think that they portrayed pilot-tude?
There's some artistic license there, obviously. I mean, it's hard to demonstrate attitude, right? And I hated this in Black Hawk Down. So they're flying the quick reaction force standby. They're up and down the coast, and they're joking on the radio about Scrabble, right? And I'm thinking, there's no Night Stalker bullshitting on the radio.
That's right.
They just don't.
That's right.
It's quiet, right? But
Yeah.
you have to portray that, things are easy going. They're, nobody's scared.
Yeah.
But, but it's too hokey. But that's just how you got to show it.
It makes you roll your eyes.
Yeah.
But to the average person.
Yeah. Because if you watch a movie, there was one about landing on the moon. I can't remember the name of it, but it was super realistic. It was boring as shit.
Yeah, I know.
Because
exactly
it was literally.
This was the one with Ryan Gosling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was.
It's terrible that we can't remember the name.
But
I know.
That's
I
why,
know the
because it
movie
was
you're
just like
talking-
real. You have to have a little bit of oomph to the story.
Yeah.
So portraying it, like I was talking to Jerry Bruckheimer after we were at the premiere for 12 Strong, and so they did an icebreaker with us and the actors, and Jerry was there, and I said, hey, I hope you did us right with the helicopters. I said, because every movie I've ever seen, The Rock, White House Down, and stuff like that, is every time, here comes this badass special operations helicopter, and they're talking cool, and we're going dark, and then the first bullet comes their way, and we're getting shot at, and they run into each other, and they all die. I was like, that's not how it works. I said, we'll just sit there and take the shots and maybe evade it if we can, but the octaves in your voice never go up, And so once again, how do you portray that?
Yep.
I don't
It's
know.
not entertaining.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Right?
because people want to see how they'd react.
Yeah.
They
Like
don't-
I flew General Franks into the U.S. Embassy when we got it back in Kabul, right? So this is still 2001.
Mhm.
I got General Franks, his wife, bunch of strap hangers, General Harrell in the back, and it's a daytime flight. And I did not want to do this. I'm like, we can't go taking the general into the embassy into Kabul in daylight. We are going to get shot down. And the staff from CENTCOM, the Central Command, is like, no, the Taliban is gone.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I get shot at every time I leave the wire, and I'm not talking little shit. It's 23 millimeter man pads. We had 16 man pads fired at us in the first 6 months.
Wow.
That's a lot. And so,
One is a lot.
but off we go. Yeah, it is. And so off we go, and they're all on headset, right?
Yeah.
So they can hear us talking, and we're giving them a little bit of a ride, down, and all of a sudden the flares deploy, the countermeasures. So a heat-seeking missile has been detected. The aircraft fires these flares automatically because it happens so fast. You can't do it.
Can't react.
You can't do it manually. It's not like missile 2:00 evading. It's like it goes by and you go, what was that? Right. And so the
So you're
flares.
saying that part of Top Gun isn't real?
No, but once again, it looks cool, right?
It does. They're dodging
Deploy the flare.
missiles.
Yeah. So the missile goes between me and Chalk 2, and so now I really drop down, and I'm getting into every little ditch and swale and trying to block, a good effective lock from the next missile.
Yeah.
And we're talking. I speed up now, almost 200 miles an hour, which is fast for a helicopter. I come whipping into the embassy, drop them in, and then I take off, and another missile comes at me. So now I drop down, and this is over Kabul, right? And you've seen it, right? And there's
But the Taliban's gone.
the Taliban's gone, and so I don't know.
Our own guy.
I don't know
Who's shooting at me?
I don't know who's got these missiles, But so I drop down on the, you got these old-fashioned TV antennas and stuff. They're like, I'm ripping them off with my wheels, but what's in front of me? Kites. There are kites everywhere, right? Because the Taliban had banned kites, right? So now here's kites everywhere. It was like barrage balloons on Omaha Beach, So I'm like, oh my God! So I'm
Dodging
zigzagging out of the way, trying to avoid the kites
Why would
because
why would they ban kites?
I don't know.
There's like a whole book on that.
Yeah, the kite runner, right? I mean, they
yeah.
get some,
I didn't read it.
but they would use
Makes sense.
Yeah, Sue's right.
they'd use fishing line,
Yeah.
because it wouldn't break, right? And the
Yeah.
problem with that is if that guy's wrapped around the rotor system, you could technically cut the tubes that control the blades. So I'm trying to avoid these, and there's this one red kite. I cannot avoid it. I'm going left, it's going left, right? It wrapped around the landing gear. That kid would not let go of that kite. He kept up for about a mile. And
You're dragging a kid?
well, it was like a half mile. But no, I didn't do that. I'm kidding, Nick. I'm kidding. But anyway, so I get back, and what's funny though is my wingman he's Puerto Rican, right, Willie, and he's got a very thick accent, and he's hilarious. He always plays up the accent, but when he gets excited, it really comes out, right? And so we land, and now we know we got to go back and get these guys, right? And I'm like, hey, we got to go back at night. And they're like, no, you're going to go back and get them in an hour. I'm like, we won't survive if we go back.
The staff really is like, you have to go get them in an hour.
Yeah.
Was this a major or a colonel?
I would bet. What are the two worst colored ranks in the military? They're both gold.
Major and major.
Major and second lieutenant.
There's no way a second lieutenant was.
No. I'm just saying that
yeah.
There's a saying that because my son's in the Navy and he's now lieutenant commander, and he's like doing these jobs he doesn't like.
Even majors hate majors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's up with that? You just get rid of it.
This is it's pure theory, but like
there's good majors and then there's staff majors.
I don't know, man. Like major, it's just so what happens is like you have like the beginning of your career is cool. It's like you're a platoon leader, right? Then you're a company commander. There's a little staff in between, but like you basically platoon leader, a little staff, company commander, cool jobs, and then like 8 years, 10 years of like.
That's why a warrant officer is so cool.
Of being a bitch for a colonel or a general. That's like major. And so you just get bitter. They're all bitter.
Yeah. There's a lot of RLOs, we call them real life officer versus a warrant officer, they'll resign their commission and take a commission as a warrant officer.
I don't blame them.
And you get a lot of those.
If you like flying, right?
Yeah.
Like if you,
Yeah.
And even though a captain and a major's higher than a warrant officer, you guys really don't give a fuck.
True.
It's
and the
like,
one,
okay, you're a major, I'm a warrant officer. Nah.
well, the cool thing, yeah.
It's true.
And the cool thing with the 160th is it's warrant officer centric. Like the very first mission they were going to do as an organization was called Honey Badger, right? And that was,
which is a great,
isn't it?
it's a great
Anyway, they're doing a rehearsal, and the chief of staff of the Army, I think it was, or maybe the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is witnessing this thing, right? So they do the first thing, and he comes up and they're doing it after action, and this major is doing the thing, and he goes, Major, why are you leading this flight? He goes, well, because I'm the senior guy. And there's a CW4 there who'd been to Vietnam and all this stuff. And he goes, why isn't he leading the flight? And they talk a little bit, and from right there, the 160th put the warrant officer flight lead program together. And so the warrant officers, so essentially the commander will give you a mission and commander's intent.
Yeah.
He may give you left and right limits, or he might not. But the warrant, basically this relationship is there anyway. And the warrant officers, it's the lunatics run the asylum, essentially. So warrant officers in the 160 flight leads in particular have a lot of say in how things are done.
Well, the military used to have a specialist program. Like
Right.
not everyone had to become a leader.
Yeah. I was a Spec 5 at one time.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I think it went up to Spec 8, I think was
It did. Yeah.
And what that allowed for people that are not military and have no idea what we're talking about is right now the military is an up or out situation unless you're a warrant, right? Warrant is kind of the only place where, because there's 5 ranks, and if you become a mythical CW5,
The unicorn, as they say.
then at that point you actually get the ability to disappear entirely. You become ethereal and no one can find you anymore. But other than the warrant officer corps, it's up or out. So if you don't get promoted, even if you're great at your job, you're gone. And there are a lot of people, and I witnessed this. There are a lot of people that are, for example, phenomenal gunners. Great at calling for fire, great at like, and they love it.
Right.
But they can't stay there. They have to.
They get promoted out of their skill level.
They get promoted out of their skill, and then they're not good.
Yeah.
And so there is a threat of like leaders just deciding somebody that could be promoted can't be because of X, Y, or Z. There's also the threat of, and we've all seen this, of a leader that like really values somebody, but for selfish reasons and won't let them.
Mm-hmm.
But, I feel like you should be able to self-select and say, you know what, I don't want to be.
Well, and some people are great technicians and they're terrible leaders.
Yeah.
You got a guy that can fix a tank or something, and
Yeah.
he can do it in half the time of everybody else, but you put him in charge, and it's like,
Yeah.
he's soup sandwich.
Yeah. Keep paying more money, but let him stay there. Like, that's the way it would work anywhere else, but for whatever reason in the military, it's like, hey, you're great at fixing this tank. Now you have to be in charge of 40 people. Well, wait a second.
Yeah.
Wait a sec. These are not necessarily the same skills.
It's not necessarily beneficial to the military to do that.
It's not beneficial to anybody. It's not good for the person. It's not good for the military, you know?
Which I'm sorry, I would have to point out, this is completely counter to the Ben Bunn theory of if you're not moving up, I'm getting rid of you.
Are we quoting Ben Bunn?
Are we
quoting Ben Bunn?
I am.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that there is a place for people that are job specific, and if they love that job, they don't have to continue to go up. I agree with that statement. Ben, we disagree with you. All right. So we've talked about the Cold War. Talk about the transition. So, Cold War, Desert Storm, you got a ton of experience in Desert Storm. How'd you end up as a Night Stalker? We didn't talk about that.
Oh, yeah. All right. So you remember I said I went to Korea. So the opportunity to be an instructor pilot, which is the top really.
What do you guys call Top Gun? What do you call your Top Gun? Like the rotary Top Gun?
There really isn't.
Is it like
one.
middle gun?
No. You know what they do? We go to WTI, which is a Marine school.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
What's WTI stand for?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Never mind.
Yeah, I don't remember. But you don't really have a Top Gun program. But you have 3 tracks. You have an instructor pilot, safety officer, and maintenance officer. And you want one of these tracks if you want to move up. So instructor pilot, I like to fly. So I like to teach people how to fly. And that's what I wanted to do. So in order to get it coming back from Korea, so Korea is a 1-year tour unaccompanied. And one of the very senior pilots had some friends at Department of the Army, and he called and said, "Hey, we got a young CW2 here, really needs the instructor pilot course. Can you hook him up?" Right? Because it's one of those things where, you could end up the safety guy, and everybody hates the safety guy. It's like, oh, you've daisy chained your extension cords. That's dangerous. That's what they do. Yeah. But anyway, I ended up at
Sounds terrible. Sounds terrible.
It is terrible. So I ended up at Fort Rucker, Alabama as an instructor. And so I'm teaching people how to fly Chinook. So they already know how to fly. They've gone through flight school, or they may have flown another airframe, and I'm teaching them how to fly Chinooks.
And what do they fly in flight school?
I learned in the UH-1 Huey.
Okay.
And then they transitioned to a TH-67, which is like a Jet Ranger. And they got rid of those just recently. Now they fly UH-72 Lakotas, which is an EC-145. A lot of air ambulance services fly them.
Yep.
And
West Point flies that, right?
That's what they fly at West Point.
For the jumpers?
Yep. And so that's kind of what they do there. But so I'm teaching there. And as a young Chief Warrant Officer too, I was not ready to do that type of assignment. Right? It's called a TDA assignment, right? It says T-O-N-E, right? So it just means there's no combat gear. You're not doing anything. You're not going anywhere. You're burning traffic circles the same hour at a time, right? With guys. So if the students are fun, it's a good time. But there was a National Guard unit in Birmingham that had traded in their CH-54 Sky Cranes, which was a cargo helicopter, an aging one, right? And they did not want to fly Chinooks, but they didn't have a choice because their unit was swapping out. So you got all these old guys that are coming in, and I'm a young guy. I'm in my 20s, right? And they're like, they don't want to listen to me. And they didn't want to fly Chinooks. And they treated me like I made it happen.
Imagine a media agency that can make a documentary that qualifies for Academy Award voting. Imagine another that created a Billboard charting music video for Five for Fighting. Imagine another that has raised so much money for nonprofits in its first year working on the Classy.org platform that at the end of the year, it was named as only the second marketing partner in Classy's history. Imagine another firm that can cover your events anywhere on planet Earth and provide a compelling series of videos about those events immediately and to your needs. And imagine another still that can help your e-commerce business take it to the next level. Now imagine that they're all the same business, Dieseljack Media. Some of you might be saying, hey, Nick, isn't that your company? And to that I answer, can a company like Dieseljack Media really be owned? Or can it merely be coaxed out like a beautiful butterfly on a spring day. As you listen to this podcast that, by the way, Diesel Jack Media created, you may be asking yourself, what's our secret? It's simple. We try not to suck. Sounds easy, right? It should be. But somehow marketing companies and media agencies always seem to get it wrong. You see, we don't make PowerPoints about doing work. We do the work because we like the work. And if one of our ideas doesn't work, you know what we do? We try another one again and again and again until our ideas start to work. Because not quitting until it's right is at the heart of not sucking. And as previously mentioned, that's what we try not to do here. Diesel Jack Media. We try not to suck. Visit us at dieseljackmedia.com. That is dieseljackmedia.com. Like you created.
Like
this.
I said, all right,
like
get rid of those.
Like the Army was like, hey, what do you think these guys should fly?
Yeah.
Chinooks.
Right. Thank you, Al. We appreciate that. And so anyway, a buddy of mine who I'd gone through the instructor pilot course with was there for another school. And he's like, Al, you hate it here. Come to the 160th. You know, it's like, I don't know. So he gives me a packet, right, for selection.
To fill out, yeah.
And back then it was all, stubby pencil. There was no laptops really.
Yep.
And so I filled it out a little at a time because I didn't know if I really wanted to go. And I didn't think I was good enough to get in. And so.
But they didn't expect the graphite self-portrait in the nude. That's what they were like. This is actually really good work. We need to talk to this guy.
Well, you have to be endowed, well, and then you're like, hey, this guy's he's got a pair, so we could use him. So I filled it out. Didn't have any blanks left, so I mailed it in. And like 2 weeks later, the recruiter calls and says, hey, Mr. Mack, we'd like you to come assess. Okay, right. So up I go. There's it's a week-long tryout essentially. And I get selected, and they're like, hey, well, about a year, right? Because, in order to let me go try out, I had to tell the command it would be about a year because they didn't want to lose me.
Yeah.
But so they didn't hate you. Even though you hated it, you were still liked it.
Oh, yeah. I was.
That's great.
Because we had guys that they didn't want to fly, so you could always find a reason on what we call pre-flight, pre-flight inspection. They'd always find, improper washer stack up or a safety wire that instead of just having it repaired on the spot, they'd be, I'm not taking this aircraft. It's unsafe. And they wouldn't fly and their students would fall behind.
Pilots that didn't want to fly.
Yeah, there were. And that's why Fort Rucker gets a bad rap sometimes is you've got guys like that there, at least at the time. And I would pick up their students because my guys would get done ahead of schedule. And they'd be like, hey, Al, you need to take so-and-so's students because they're, 10 hours behind.
And that's when they started calling you Mac Daddy or Daddy Mac, depending on.
I've had all those. I've had all those, yeah. And
Mac the Knife? Has that
I've had that one as well, yeah.
All right.
But so they called me up and said, hey, we'd like you to come like next month. And I'm like, my commander's not going to like that. And they're like, well, it takes 8 months to get a guy through the pipeline. Anyway, you got to come up. I'm like, okay, right. So I went up there. The commander was not happy, but I got there, and that's sort of how I got there.
Cool, very cool. So what time frame is this?
So this is 1995.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So shortly after Black Hawk Down.
Right.
So you came into the Night Stalkers right in the aftermath of Black Hawk Down.
Right.
Talk about the effect that had on training and on outlook. And I have no idea what the answer is here, but I have spent a bunch of time with the Rangers that served there. And I know that, Black Hawk Down had a profound effect on Rangers in Delta,
right,
and how they operated going forward. So how did that affect you guys?
Well, first of all, one of the things I can tell you, remember I said that a lot of the pilots on the 160th are former operators. Mm-hmm. Well, we had a couple of guys that were in Task Force Ranger that were now Chinook pilots. A good friend of mine got shot in the butt cheek in that convoy, back and forth.
Wow.
And it affected us. One of the things it did is it improved weapons training. So at the time we had MP5s, right, as a primary weapon, which is useless in that kind of fight.
Yep.
and but it looked cool. It's silenced. And they changed to the M4, and then some of the weapons training improved, and some of the flight tactics changed. So in this case, they put the assault force in, and they went into a wagon wheel. They just went around and around, because what's cool about it is you can see what's going on, and you can kind of time when you're going to go get fuel, or if you've got to do something. And of course what happened is the RPGs came at them because it was very predictable. So becoming more unpredictable was one of the things that we started working on, or they started before I got there.
And how does one do that, for example?
Well, one of the things that I like to say for me is that I'm predictably unpredictable, meaning I'm going to do something you don't expect, so you got to pay attention to me if you're following me. And overseas, the ground force would go for, like, say, 6 months, and the 160th guys, after a couple of years, we would go for 90 days or something like that at a time. You'd leave for a month and come back, so you'd have a different flight lead. And instead of intentionally trying to create new ways in and out of our bases, because how hard could it be? Oh, they're all taken off out of Kabul, right? We know they're coming in and out, so all you got to do is put your AAA or your man pads right there, and when they're, So because each flight lead is different, and we're changing out every 60 to 90 days, just by virtue of personality and comfort level, you'll do something different. So just as the enemy is starting to get a feel for, oh, they always come out this way. Yeah. Well, guess what? Here's Al, and Al goes this way. And now, they're waiting for me to change back, but I don't. And then the next guy comes in, and he likes to go that way. By the time you get here, they're all confused. And we always felt that was one of those things, based on intel, that was confusing the enemy. So that's one of the things that we did.
Do you think that the negative things that happened in Black Hawk Down saved lives long term?
Yeah. A lot of the Combat Lifesaver program improved, trying to stay flying at night, although sometimes the situation drives a daylight mission, which in that case it did. But if you're going to do a daylight mission, how do you make adjustments so the enemy does not have an advantage, right? Because the one thing with us fighting at night is we have all the advantage. We've got aircraft that are very sophisticated and do some really cool things.
Yep.
Night vision goggles, we're good at doing it. You use lasers and all these things that people can't see with the naked eye. And we're good at it. And it's hard to see you if there's no moon or other artificial illumination. You go out in the daylight, you lose half of those advantages, and you've got to make up for them in other ways, and sometimes you can't, so like a quick reaction force mission, you are reacting solely to the enemy action, right? They now have the advantage because they know you're going to come.
Yep.
Right. So one of the things I learned from being shot down in Operation Anaconda was that I realized that after Razor 01 got shot down coming to save me, that the enemy knows you're coming. So you can't just, like in the movies, just keep coming in with helicopters, and everybody getting shot down, because that's kind of what happened in Anaconda. Everybody got a shot up because they, were trying.
They knew. Yeah. I mean, it's the old movie deal where, the sniper shoots one guy and everybody runs out trying to save him.
Exactly.
And then the sniper shoots everybody.
So in the ensuing years after Anaconda, one of the things that, and this is why it was good that I had a good reputation with the customers, is because when I told them something, they would listen, usually. And there's some times they didn't.
Except for the majors.
Yes, actually. But and I'll tell you a funny story about the snow. But I would make a point if something happened, especially a quick reaction force, to say, all right, where do you want to go, right? Because it was typically Rangers. It could be SEALs, or a couple times it was Delta. And I'd say, what is it you want to do? Well, the vehicle got ambushed here. Here's the guys. I want to go right here. I'm like, I highly recommend you don't do that. They're going to know we're coming there. How about we go over here on the other side of this hill? They'll see us come in, but they won't be able to shoot us while we land when we're vulnerable. And you can do your ground guy stuff and, go shoot them. And they're like, yeah, but that's like another 300 meters. I'm like, well, you could be on the X and get shot down with them. Would you rather do that? No. And then it became normal. People realized, okay, you can't just keep throwing helicopters at the enemy because they have all the advantage. So anyway, those are the things we learned really from, Mogadishu, and then it just continues to evolve, over time. And that's why it's so important that the 160th keeps their warrant officers as long as you want to stay and are productive, and that institutional knowledge travels with you, stays with the organization. So it's very important.
So, jumping ahead, 9/11 happens, and you were involved in, one of the first missions of that conflict.
Yeah.
Now referred to as the horse soldier mission, and we all have that iconic photo, of the SF guy on horseback, and of course it's been made a movie since.
Which, by the way, I really think Chris Hemsworth should have played me, but
is he buff enough? That's
he's a little too short. I thought so. We did the casting. I was like, hey, sorry, Chris, you're too short.
And like the abs weren't quite there.
He's like this much taller than me.
So, talk about that, because, there is no human being that was in the military that did not want to be part. I mean, like, it didn't matter if you were like an admin clerk or, Delta.
Right.
Everybody wanted in at that moment, like that. It's hard to describe to people that weren't in the military at the time.
And it's also hard to describe to people who weren't old enough to watch people jumping out of those towers.
That's right.
Right.
I was alive.
What's that?
I said I was alive. I wasn't alive in the 80s, but
like,
I'm alive now.
You were like one, right?
But did you watch it?
One.
I mean, a lot of
three.
I was in, yeah.
3. You were 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like.
But I was there. So.
But the thing is, you didn't.
Thank you for your.
You didn't
support.
know that these people were jumping out of the buildings to not get burned, right?
No, she was like.
I do have a photo of myself in New York with the towers before, which is crazy.
Yeah, that Ground Zero museum is nice.
It's really
they've
nice.
done a really nice job with it.
Yeah, they've done a beautiful job with that.
But think about where you were when that happened, right? I mean, I was down at JRTC, the Joint Readiness Training Center, Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is now renamed something. I remember watching the towers go down, and I had just. This is like something out of a movie. I had just left the company as the senior pilot to become the battalion senior pilot. So now I was on staff essentially, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to get to go because I work for the colonel now, not the major. And turns out they needed another flight lead anyway. So I was attached to them, which, like you said, you're always afraid you're going to miss the fight. And so we get to Uzbekistan shortly. I mean, we were down in Tampa the next day. We drove down, 15 packs van, a couple planners to SOCCENT, Special Operations Command, Central Command. And what I didn't know is the 5th group guys were in one room over, and they never asked to talk to the helicopter guys, right? Because they still didn't really know what they were going to do, but they did kind of know they'd need helicopters. They just didn't understand the difficulties of flying those distances in Afghanistan, at those altitudes.
Yeah.
Right. So, which they found out when they finally got to Uzbekistan. But, so we're ready to go. And, we were in Uzbekistan, which is just north of Afghanistan, at a base called Karshi-Kanabad, K2. And we've got 4 helicopters, 4 Chinooks. And our mission at the time is personnel recovery. So if one of the bombers goes down, they're taking the fight to the Taliban so we can get to bin Laden, right? Because they're protecting him. And our job is for somebody to have a bad day, we'll go get them, we'll rescue them. We don't know anything about what's called the UW campaign, unconventional warfare. That's 5th group's mission, right? The Green Beret, core mission. So October 19th is the first mission we actually went in. Actually, it was 2 nights before that. Razor 01 tried to go in to the Hampshire Valley, right, with an ODA called Triple Nickel 555. And they get turned around because of the weather. They're at 23,000 feet or so, in the snow and the rain. The radar doesn't have the performance up there. The aircraft doesn't have the performance to use the radar. So they're like just kind of inching their way up the mountains on oxygen. Doesn't work. They turn around, they come back. My mission now rolls 24 hours because they had to get in first because a warlord named Fahim, who was their guy in the Northern Alliance, said if we got them to Dostum first, that's the guy that ended up with the horse soldiers, he would attack Dostum, right? Which is why this little rivalry is why the Al-Qaeda killed Massoud, because he was the leader of the Northern Alliance. With him gone, they thought we couldn't coordinate the other warlords to make an effective fighting team, if you will. So anyway, they come back. I'm mad because now another 24 hours before I get to go in, and I'm afraid someone's gonna, like the SecDef is gonna say, all right, this mission's obviously too tough. This can't be done. Let's not do it. So they go the next night and they turn around, and I am not a good teammate, right? This guy comes back, Arlo, and I meet him in the planning area, and I'm like, pushed my fingers in his chest, like, you know, what the hell, man? Were you scared? You know? And he's like, dude, I almost died in the mountains. We're lucky to be here, and we're literally shoving each other. Now, Arlo's bigger than me, and you know, a lot stronger. He was a wrestler, and he would essentially crush me. But I am pissed off now.
But you were like,
yeah, I'm like, we're gonna. So anyway, I think I got another 24 hours, and they're definitely going to call us off, right? But it turns out that while we're asleep, you know, during the day, Secretary Rumsfeld called personally to the TF Dagger planning area, and this major, Mark, we'll call him, picks up the phone, and he says, you know, hello, Task Force Dagger, you know, planning area, and like, this is Donald Rumsfeld. You get those teams in tonight, or else, you know, click. Okay, the rules of the game have changed.
yeah.
But they didn't tell us that.
I
right?
mean, that's pretty crappy, but
Well, but the cool thing for us is
now you know.
so
now you know.
Arlo is going to go, and the problem is he's going in higher mountains, and he needs one of my helicopters to do it, right? Because he needs the extra lift. What that means is I'm now alone, and they don't really want me to fly by myself, me and my crew. And they give me the DAPs, the Armed Blackhawks, but they are not equipped quite like I am, nor can they actually go into the mountains that I'm about to go into. So they'll follow me as far as they can. It's almost like World War II, you know, the fighters following the bombers until they, you know, really need them, and they got to hang out, right? And so then I come out, and there's 2 of the 200 left, you know, and that's what these guys were going to do. And so we take off, and the only caveat here is that I have to be 30 minutes after Fahim gets his guys, right? So Fahim gets his Green Berets. He's satisfied that he's the first, and I can touch down for General Dostum with the horse soldiers, right? They're not known that at the time. It's 595. But so we take off. It's a beautiful night. And I'm walking out there. They're towing my aircraft out to the takeoff area, looking up at the sky. The stars are out. It's beautiful, super cold. And what I don't realize, the weather forecast is for a beautiful night. What they didn't know at the time was that there was a sandstorm just on the other side of the river into Afghanistan that was several thousand feet thick, and you couldn't see more than about 1/8 of a mile. So we take off out of K2. I've got my DAPs in tow, and we hit our first tanker. So we're doing air refueling from an Air Force MC-130 Papa. We got our gas. We break off. We head into Afghanistan. The DAPs are like on my 5 o'clock and 8 o'clock position, and we're just flying along and everything's good till we cross the border, and all of a sudden you can't see. It's like driving in the worst fog you've ever been in, on a road, right?
But you're flying.
But we're flying. So here's the thing. So the DAPs, the pilots, they got some cojones. They sucked in close, so they're with the night vision goggles. They could not see the helicopter, but they could see the glow of my 2 engines, right? So if I increased power, the glow got bigger, and they knew to start climbing. If the glow got smaller, it meant I was in a descent, and they would descend. And that's what they did. And it's like, that's insane.
Yeah, that's
insane. This is right after 9/11. We're all trying to do this. And eventually they cried uncle, hey, we can't do this. So they turn around. Now it's just my aircraft. And I'm like, they're not going to let me go, by ourselves. But I got the battalion commanders in my jump seat, right? And he knows about the Rumsfeld edict, right? So he's like, well, Al, what do you think?
Hey,
I'm
to
like,
quote Don Rumsfeld, you go to war with the army that you have, not the army that you want.
yeah,
I know that's a bastardization of the quote, but
yeah. But so here's the first time we get to use the terrain following radar ever for real, right? So I said, sorry, I think we just TF, which is terrain following. And he's like, do it. I'm like, wow. Hit the button.
And you're like, man, I hope this works.
Right? Because, and I'll tell you why it's a big deal. The reason we never got to use it in training, I mean, you could use it in good weather conditions, but you couldn't do it when you couldn't see out the window because occasionally the damn thing would just reboot or lock up, right? And you'd have to fix it, right? So imagine your iPhone or your laptop, you got to hit control, delete, whatever.
I get it.
Yeah. So now you're in the mountains.
I'm also well informed about military equipment and how effective it was,
Well, this thing worked really, so we're flying along and my co-pilot is on what we call the Q, right? So it's a little up and down arrow telling you how much power to do and the steering cue. And then we've got a radar display and I'm looking at it and everything's good. And we turn our first corner and the radar commands about 10 miles out. And there was a mountain in between that, except we didn't plan the route to account for that, right? Because this is something we learned on this mission.
Yeah.
So I turn the corner and we get what's called a full climb command, meaning the aircraft does not have the performance to clear whatever's ahead, right? And I don't know what it is because it's just outside the display. And all you can do is climb like your life depends on it because it does. And, we're just climbing. He slows back to best climb airspeed. The aircraft's just about 4,000 or 5,000 foot a minute, which is fast for a helicopter at those altitudes.
Yeah.
And I'm scrolling through the maps. You have these digital maps. I'm like looking for a scale that'll tell me what's ahead. And I'm like, there's a mountain.
A giant
right
mountain.
there. So I gave him a cue to turn him off to the right a little bit. Gets the mountain out of the command corridor. The aircraft descends. We get past it. We resume our thing, right? And no more problems. But now when we get to the destination, you still have to see to land. And where they were going, there was no friendly forces other than there was a CIA team there that had gone in the night before. And they didn't have an IR strobe, right? So normally at night you have the benefit of, a laser pointer or a strobe or something to say this is the location, right? There's nothing. And we do break out of the clouds. I've got about 4,000 feet to lose and about a half mile because on the other side of the landing zone is a ZPU 23-4, which is a anti-aircraft gun with 4 barrels, 23 millimeter, right? If that gets a beat on me, I'm done. I mean, we'll be Swiss cheese and that'll be that. So you have to keep the little hill in it. So we start.
And you knew that was there already.
Yeah. So we start doing these, what we call S turns.
Mm-hmm.
So we're losing altitude laterally instead of going toward the target. And my co-pilot is fairly new, so I start doing it, except at the very bottom, when it's time to turn to the LZ, it's on his side and I can't see the landing area. I'm like, Jethro, you got the landing area? He's like, yep. I said, you have the controls. And I basically screwed him, because typically you get the landing area and you get lined up and there's little magnetic brakes on the controls and you can hit the switch and the controls will stay where they are. So you can kind of get set up and then you can just fight the springs. And he got it on the ground, but it was scary.
But he was not happy with you.
He was not happy with me. And I definitely screwed him. But so the dust settles. We're surrounded by all these guys in those, Northern Alliance hats, the Pacol, I think they call it, a little flat hat. And they all got AK-47s and they all look mean. And I don't know if they're Taliban or because they can switch sides, right?
Yeah,
They're they consider themselves pragmatic in that way.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
as long as they end up on the winning side.
Yeah. So the team comes off.
They're like the Italians in that way.
And like the Italians, they do a little, a couple of man hugs, and it's like, okay, I guess this is them. The team leader gives me a thumbs up and we took off, went back, did the same thing on the way home. And then we did that night after night after night.
Wow.
And we were pushing the aircraft performance so much. And there were 2 flight leads, me and Arlo. And we snuck off in a bunker. And one of the CIA pilots had given us a bottle of Jack Daniels. And we had a couple of snorts. And we're like, what do you think? He's like, I think we'll last maybe another mission. We'll die. I'm like, yeah, I agree.
Wow.
And we did not. And we just kept going, But it was, what are you going to do? Someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
So it was us.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So talk about, I mean, that is an iconic moment in history. How does it feel to be part of that?
Well, it was an honor. And, I did it for about 10 years of combat deployments. And I get asked every once in a while, would you do it again, knowing what you know now? And the answer is yes, I would. Now, the difference is that we always thought we were going to get in and get out, right? I didn't think, 10 years of combat. I even thought, we could finish up the war before my kids were of age to serve, and both of them did. My youngest son was a crew chief in the 160th and served overseas, and my oldest ended up flying F-18s and also flew in Afghanistan, Syria, stuff like that. And I thought we had finished it because one of the things, people think that bin Laden just disappeared, and then we found him. Oh, look, there he is. Yeah. The intelligence services always kind of knew about where he was. So you'd go on a deployment and you get briefed, hey, if he's here, how would you do that? And you'd get with the ground force and we'd figure out, so every time you went, you kind of knew
roughly where
he was.
was.
They'd like, here's where we think he is. And it was always in the same circle. They just had to find the house. And, so you always thought you were going to be the guy to do it until it came time to go home. And then you were afraid the guy behind you was going to get him.
Yeah.
Which it turns out the guy I was always afraid of was going to get him. Got him. Damn it. So anyway, you just kept trying. So yeah, it was an honor to do it.
When you look back, you've obviously 10 years of flying covert missions. Is there one that stands out as man, I was a part of history?
Well, obviously the horse soldiers, but probably the rescue of Marcus Luttrell was probably a good one because so we were doing 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off of Quick Reaction Force, QRF. And I was augmenting our 3rd Battalion, which was flying an older version of the Chinooks called the MH-47 Delta, right? And I was flying the MH-47 Echoes, which was what we used in the first part of the war, with our company from Korea. We had one company in Pacific Command, PACOM, and they were augmenting this. So there were 7 Delta models and 2 Echoes. And the Marines wanted to do Operation Red Wings, and they asked the Army to help them, well really USASOC, to help them get in the mountains. And they didn't have helicopters that would do that. The Deltas were a less capable aircraft, but they were lighter by 2,000 pounds because they had less equipment. So we decided that it would be best if they took all these Marines in because they could carry a lot more people than I could. I could fly in worse weather, but they could carry more people. And the idea was you were only going to do the mission in good weather anyway because you had to have a stack overhead and an ISR.
Sure.
So we're going to do a changeover on QRF, and because 3rd Bat's got it right now, and I'm doing some other stuff. And they put in a 4-man SEAL element, which Marcus was part of, right? Michael Murphy and the other fellows. And they're compromised. And so they asked for exfil, and there's some bit of a story there to why they didn't get exfil right away. It was a communications issue. But, Michael Murphy gets on his sat phone and says, hey, we need exfil right now. So Major Steve Reich, who also was a Major League Baseball player at one time, good friend of mine, is the commander of B Company, 3rd Battalion. And he's on the QRF. And he's also a West Pointer. They got a nice little thing for him there at the baseball diamond. But so I'm coming on as QRF, right? I come into the planning area. You got all these big screen TVs everywhere. I get my coffee. I sit down. I'm like, what's going on? And I sit down next to the battalion commander. I'm like, sir, what's going on? Oh, the SEALs have been compromised. We're launching the QRF. I look at my watch. I'm like, well, technically that's me. He goes, yeah, but Major Reich was already up. They were already dressed. They went to do it. I'm like, okay. So I'm watching with coffee, watching the ISR feed, right? There's a A-10 actually looking down on the one place you could land. We called it HLZ Thresher. It was on top of about a 12,000-foot ridge line, just a little logging area. And there's nowhere to land. They're going to fast rope in. So I watched the aircraft go in, and then you see a big bloom because this is it's a FLIR, forward-looking infrared, right? So you can see heat. And what it was is an RPG, rocket-propelled grenade hits up in the aft transmission area. The aircraft kind of limps away and then comes apart, and then it comes off screen. So, wow, I just watched him get shot down. So I looked at the colonel and said, "Sir, I can be in the air in like 20 minutes." He's like, "Go." So off we go. The crew chiefs have the aircraft already ready for us, up to engine start. I literally have to throw my body armor, sit in the seat, buckle the belt, and start the engine. And we're in the air. We've got now our SEALs from our task force, the DevGru guys. And I am flying about 150 knots, which, with a full load, I got like 20 SEALs on board. And we're at high altitude. I'm going the most direct route I can. And my mind is racing. What am I going to do when I get there? The only place I can take them is that one spot. And the enemy, what did I just say earlier? The enemy knows I'm coming.
No, you're coming.
And I don't know what I'm going to do, And I would say, luckily, they diverted us. I'm like, I call on the radio, 6 minutes out. They're like, nope, divert to JBAD. So we went over to Jalalabad to the headquarters that the SEALs had there, so we could come up with a better plan, which was really a good idea, actually. And we end up, slowly bringing forces in. The weather was terrible. And so they sent Rangers and SF guys on foot, to get in there, right? I mean, you got to get in there somehow to get these guys. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's aircrew survived, who knows? And I tell you, this is the toughest but a week of flying I ever had to do, because not only did the enemy know where you were coming, and there was only 3 ways into the valley.
Yep.
One was cloud shrouded every single day. So really there's 2 ways in, because I've got these Delta models with me. The Echoes can fly through it, but they won't let me go alone. They want me to lead the Deltas in there. So we're bringing more and more Rangers and SEALs in to look for survivors or, killed in action.
Yep.
And you're fighting thunderstorms, and the radar doesn't work in a thunderstorm because it sees it as an obstacle.
Did you have a sense, when did you have a sense that Luttrell was potentially still alive?
We had recovered a couple of bodies, and we were rehearsing a dignified transfer. So my NCO, my non-commissioned officer, Trey Ponder, was augmenting them. So he was riding along, and he was killed on that shoot down. So I was one of his pallbearers, and we were practicing, how you would do that. We got the coffins, and they're full of water or something like that initially. And while we're practicing, this captain comes out. He's like, "Al, we got a survivor. You got to come right now." And so somebody took my place as a pallbearer. We come back. We're in the Rescue Coordination Center. Like, yeah, we got Marcus Luttrell. We got his beacon location and his ISO prep. So every special operator that's overseas has a little Tyvek card, with little messages of, help this man and we'll reward you, right? And it has a number, a little serial number, right? So everybody has this number, and the Joint Personnel Recovery Center knows who that is. So he gave that number to, I don't remember the guy's name, Gul Muhammad or something, Gulbadin or whatever. Mm-hmm. So he walks into a Marine Corps base nearby, about 10 clicks, says that, "We've seen his embidder beacon at the location he's at." All right, this has got to be him, So they send an SF ODA, his Green Berets, and some Afghans to secure him, right? So they kind of secured the perimeter while we planned the rescue. And this was probably I would say this is the best mission I ever planned, because it involved pre-assault fires, deception fires, coordination with the Air Force, rescue helicopter. So it was kind of interesting. When they found out where he was, they were going to let the HH-60s, that's a Black Hawk from the Air Force, go pick him up. And I looked at it and I said, there's no way they've got the performance to do that. And the tiered fields are big enough for a Chinook. I can land right there. And I was a little more animated than that. Yeah. I was like, no way these guys are doing that, right? These are our guys. And they'll crash because they don't have the power. Yeah. So the head PJ, a guy named Tom, he was smart. He said, all right, Al, you can go get him. But we've got about a 20-minute window in between storms. So you get to go in once that night, and we still have people missing. and we still need to bring Rangers in to look for bodies. And the Black Hawk can't do that. And I was like, all right, there's no choice to make here. Okay, he can go get them. I said, but I'm planning the mission. And the Air Force guy's like, yeah, go for it, right? Because I'm familiar with the area. They haven't been in there yet.
Yep.
So they stripped that baby down. There was nothing, no guns, no ammo, no rescue equipment. It was all they could do.
So it would have enough power to land in that.
Yep.
In that
And
altitude.
so I sat down with the A-10s and the AC-130, which is something I'd never actually done before. I told them what I wanted. In this case, I laid up my map. I was like, here's the desired effects I want. You tell me how you're going to do this, right? So we knew that, we had to come in a certain way. And I kind of planned for, hitting what I considered key terrain. This is where I think bad guys would likely hide. I want to hit those with whatever you want, right? And the AC-130 used, I think, 40 millimeter. You just pepper these areas. And that way, if they're covered with canvas, because you can hide from, heat signature with little sand on a canvas top. And so they hit that. And then the 60 would come in. And then just before he came in to the actual open area, they shifted to this big ridge line. They started dropping 500 pounders. I said, I want the biggest, nastiest explosion. I want people to go, what the hell is that? Right? And a 60 comes in, and then you come back again. So you shift fires back. And then on the way out, you do the same thing. And then as they come out, I'm coming in with the Rangers and put them at the top of the hill and come out. And it was really a piece of artwork.
That's awesome.
Luttrell talks about it.
You're smiling about
I
it.
am smiling. I've got goosebumps. Luttrell talks about it in his book. He's like, oh, it's amazing. There's big explosions everywhere. It's like, yeah. And I did that. It's cool.
That's incredible. People don't, I think people that are not in the military don't realize how much thought goes into some of these things, because it is easy to think about, the bad guys as being stupid.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's quite the opposite, and the longer wars go on, the more people learn and the smarter they get and tactics change. And so,
you got to learn. I mean, you got to evolve, and the one thing that I would say, having been shot down in Anaconda in March of 2002, was I was never effectively engaged again without intending to be. So that caught me by surprise, right? Bad on me. I did get shot up a couple of other times, but I knew I would.
But you knew you were going.
It was like, okay, we're going to the X. It's a hot infill or exfil.
Yep.
We're going to take some heat, but I know it. We rescued a bunch of Rangers that had been left on objective, and we came in hot exfil, and it was kind of cool. They knew what time we were coming. They knew which way we were coming from, and yet we caught them by surprise anyway. It was night. It was windy, dark, no moon, and we come in there in a firefight. We come in, and the miniguns just start opening up as we enter the dust cloud.
That'll catch your attention.
The minigun doesn't go, dot, 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 dot. It goes, yeah. And you can't talk in the aircraft when that's happening. And a dust landing is a very crew coordinated event. Usually the crew chief helps you. And we come in, and the bad guys, they were Chechens. So these weren't even Taliban. They were some nasty folks. Mm-hmm. And they turned their guns on us, as the Rangers are starting to collapse to the aircraft. And the gun just, opens up again and again and again and again. And I'm just sitting there with my arms at my side. And what I would do is, because you've got a chicken plate, right? You've got a Kevlar plate right here. But it's not big enough. It's like the size of this book.
Yeah.
And I was always afraid of a bullet coming in from the side.
Yep.
So I would put my arms at my side while I waited for the guys to load, so that if a bullet hit me from the side, maybe arm bone.
Maybe it bounces off.
You keep it from rattling around on my chest. Yeah. And luckily I didn't get hit. The aircraft took a lot of hits, but I learned, from Anaconda, and we did some deception there. And of course we had to use overwhelming force to keep them at bay, while the Rangers got on board. But
going back to Marcus, that obviously at the time it was a important mission, but it has become an iconic mission. What was it like to get somebody out?
Oh, it feels good
after that situation.
It feels good. The most rewarding missions aren't even. Yeah, I'm getting a little choked up here. Killing bad guys, taking them off the field feels good, right? It just does. But Yeah, can we stop just a second here?
Sure.
He's got a. That's weird.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, taking bad guys off the field, like I said, it feels good. They're not killing people anymore. But rescuing somebody that needs, Casevac, get some guy, his, his kids may not have a father. Get them home safe. It feels really good. And
You guys do the Lord's work. I mean, like it.
Well, I'll tell you, I think Casevac's my favorite, in that it sucks that somebody has to get hurt, but it feels good, to get people.
Were you able to interact with Marcus at that time, or?
No, I've never actually met him.
You've never met him?
No. I reached out a couple of times, but I'm sure there's a gatekeeper, that.
So I'll tell you. So he's. So I first, very random stuff. The first time I met Marcus was on the back of essentially a school bus, and at the time, a couple of guys that are friends of mine, Matt Burden and Jim Hansen, they used to run a website called Black 5. Right back in the day, it was the mill blog. When mill blog, this is before the internet, before like Facebook, and before mill blogs were kind of the thing, and they had what they called the Heroes Tour. Now Marcus was not a household name. The book had not come out yet. It was about to come out, and so it was like a group of guys, and they were trying to like educate people on the war. And Marcus and I are in the back of this bus drinking like Coors Lights or something, and he's just like, I didn't know who he was like exactly, and he's kind of telling me his story, and like he wasn't in a good place at that time. So that was like the first time I met him, and then we met again at, I can't remember, it was a charity event, but then so we kind of like were acquainted. And then when we made the movie Range 15, we're like, man, it'd be really cool to have Marcus Luttrell in this, because we were trying to kind of make it a who's who of military personalities. And so it was like, reached out to him, and he was like, I'll do it on one condition. And we're like, all right, like we're waiting for this weird condition. And he's like, I want to die first. I want the lone survivor to be the first casualty. And so that's what we did. But then we decided we couldn't just kill him, so he comes back. But that guy shows up on set. Massive positive energy, like helping people out.
I'm glad to hear that.
Bought everybody hot dogs, because we ended up going late that night. So went out and like just bought everyone bought like 100 hot dogs and brought them to the crew. And profoundly thankful for you guys, like profoundly thankful. And I've seen him consistently since then. I've been to a number of events where he has kind of come to charity events and helped out, recently with Warrior Rising. Profoundly committed to paying the debt to you guys. So you guys should meet. I will see if I can't make that connection. But
when he talks about the guys that rescue him, he always chokes up.
He chokes up. Yeah, he starts crying every time.
Well, the Air Force got, funny story. They bring the mood back up.
Yeah.
So
it's okay. The mood can be down. It's all right.
I'll tell you,
it's all right.
I wanted to be funny, Alan, not depressing. But
your wife, she said,
I started to be funny, Alan. No, so we have this. We started doing the New York Air Show, right, which is in Orange County, New York. It was supposed to be in Coney Island, and Mayor de Blasio didn't want to pay the overtime for the first responders, right? So this is 61.
I just like to say names that sound evil.
It does, right? It's like an evil genius.
Yeah.
$1 million. But so they decide this is 61 days from the show, right?
Yeah. One Ranger school away from the show.
Typically it takes a year, right? So they the promoter reaches out, finds my county executive. I'm flying for West Point at the time, and they decide they're going to do it at Stewart Airport, which is the 105th Air National Guard base is there. 2nd Aviation for West Point is there, and they have commercial carriers.
So they cancel it 60. They say 60 days before the show.
Yeah. Yeah, so so the county executive says, "Hey, I want to do this." So he writes an email to General Caslin, who was the soup of West Point, and he's like, "We really need your help. We can't do this without you." And so he CCs me.
He's a good man.
So Caslin CCs me, and he's like, "Talk to Chief Mack. He'll hook you up with whatever you need." Commander's intent.
Yep, there you go.
And mission. So the county exec comes to the hangar, like, "Hey, first thing we need is a press conference." So there's my ramp, right? It's huge, right? This used to be a battalion hangar. Now it's 2 Lakotas and 2 fixed wing and the state police. So they bring over a C-17, a C-130, and I'm like, my Lakota has to be in there. Right? So a little helicopter in the middle. Yeah. And we get with the picture, and I helped make it happen, right? Which is how I ended up with the job that I have now for the county executive. Is he liked, when I retired, he's like, "Hey, I really like how you did business." And he's a naval reservist, good guy.
Yeah.
And so I start working for him, but we make the air show happen. And I even took the Raptor team in a Lakota for a ride around the city, and I took them down around Coney Island and say, "Look, the New York Air Show is actually over Coney Island with a Raptor team in a Lakota," but yeah, forgot where I was going with that.
Now,
The mood up.
yeah.
Oh, that's right.
That's right. You were trying to bring the mood up.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this now. All the tapping on the table.
Yeah.
Our editors are gonna go nuts. Like,
3-6,
part of me is giggling, but now
I'll be good.
I am gonna tell you.
I'll be good.
Because 1 or 2 here and there is okay, but when you're like this, she's gonna have to try to get all of those out of the audio.
Teresa, I tried to stop them.
You deserve this, Teresa.
Oh,
You
no.
deserve this.
Or now that you know it, maybe you let it go. Here's how. One of the things I would do flying. Did you ever see the movie Fury?
Yes.
With the tank, right?
Yeah.
So the gunner, who's Shia LaBeouf, right? So while they're trying to take out that Tiger tank, he's got to wait till the tank gets in the right position, and the whole time his heel is just tapping on the floor. That's me. When I'd be about 10 minutes out, I'd announce to the customers, I'd be like, "All right, 10 minutes," and then you hear that repeated in the back, and you just get the goosebumps, and my heel would just start tapping, and I'd start pulling on my gloves, trying to make sure they were tight enough. And
Now, how often did you play Credence as you were coming into target?
Never. In our song, we were AC/DC because for a long
that's
time
good.
we had
Yeah,
the call sign Thunder.
So you were
And
thunderstruck.
it's like,
Yeah.
Thunder.
Well, yeah. That was the video of the '90s. Do you remember the Thunderstruck Army moto video?
Yeah.
Had the tank like jumping over the dune or whatever, which then we found out the tank got like absolutely destroyed, but it still looked cool in that picture. Yeah.
I think I know the guy that was in that. He was actually he was a sergeant at the time, ended up a pilot.
Well, it looked awesome, but having spent time in Bradley's, that had to have hurt. There's nothing soft in any of the, it's like the pad on your seat is like that thin, and that's the only pad. Everything else is just metal. So that must have been like,
Oh yeah, I can't even imagine.
that must have been brutal. Anyway, so horse soldiers saving Marcus Luttrell. Those are some pretty big moments. You stayed in for 35 years.
Yeah.
That is a lot of years to be in uniform. Why did you stay in that long?
Well, number one, I really enjoyed it, and as you know, as you increase in rank and time in the military, your life gets easier, right? It becomes more of a normal, you live in a house, you have a family,
Yeah.
the pay gets better. And I really enjoyed being a flight lead in the 160th, and the only reason I left is I had the unfortunate situation. My wife at the time had an opioid addiction, prescription meds, and she died of an overdose. And the only reason I left the 160th was I needed a change of venue, and the West Point Flight Detachment turned out to be my landing spot, which was great because the cadets essentially recharged me. The positive energy, the smiles. They taught me how to skydive.
Oh, that's cool.
I got to jump out of my own helicopter onto the plane at West Point, once I got 50 jumps.
That's cool.
And it was a lot of fun. And then the only reason I got out of the Army was because the Army decided that 3 years was enough at West Point. Time to go back to the community, meaning back to Special Operations.
Yep.
And I'd just been remarried to a woman from New York. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to take a woman who's never left New York, drop her in Fayetteville, and then go TDY.
Why not?
And my
Why
sons
not?
talked me out of it.
Like, like Westchester County or Fayetteville.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you were in Westchester, but you were close to
No,
Westchester.
it's just north of there,
Yeah,
Putnam. But
Yeah. That's, Fayetteville
Yeah.
is
And the funny thing with her, and things connect, is that she lost her stepbrother in the North Tower.
oh, wow.
And we were connecting and we were trying to get to know each other in that courting phase, right?
Yep.
And she's like, so where were you on 9/11? I'm like, well, I did this and this and this and this.
I was with the horse. So
I was like, I was America's response, And she's like, what is that, right? And I had to tell her about it. And none of her family or friends knew anything about
how is that
it.
possible?
I don't know. It just didn't.
Before the movie, nobody knew.
Really?
Nick, before the movie, nobody knew that.
No.
Nobody.
Well, maybe outside the military. Maybe no one.
Outside the military,
Because the pictures of those guys. So I remember we actually made I'm trying to remember. I remember those guys reaching out. When we posted about them. I don't know, 2008 or something. And
they
those,
had a liquor or something.
well, they do now. Now it's everywhere now.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Horse Soldier bourbon. It's good.
Yeah, it's good bourbon. Yeah, and that I'm I would say it's,
I know you would.
because I'm precious with bourbon, and
Yeah.
it's good bourbon. It really is.
Yeah, they're good guys. I'm doing a fundraiser with them in September. They got their interpreter out just recently, so
Awesome.
they've got a fundraiser for that.
That's great.
Support that family.
That's great.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So I know you like that kind of stuff, right?
I do like that kind of stuff. Do you want to talk about opioids? Is that a thing you want to talk about, or do you want to?
Yeah, no, that's fine. One of the things that helped me through that was a group called Al-Anon, right? So it's a companion group to AA, right? So you have the alcoholics, addicts, whatever, and their family members. And the one thing that sucks about being a family member of an alcoholic or an addict is that you feel like you can fix them, but you can't, right? And that just drives you nuts. And that's one of the things that
Especially for a guy like you.
I need control.
Especially, yeah.
That's why I was a flight lead. They
Yeah.
they would tell us when I first became a flight lead, a very senior flight lead told me, he says, if you have an opportunity, never give up lead. Even if there's another flight lead in the formation, never give up lead, because you won't be happy with the way they're doing it, right? Remember I said everybody's a little bit different. Well, so I need control. And,
I get it.
and what I found overseas is that I felt, and I still feel this way, my level of PTSD, if you will, I don't really feel like I have any, but I do, in that when I don't have control and somebody could get hurt, I get really antsy.
Yeah.
And so it was bad, as she spiraled out of control, it just got worse and worse and worse. And I was a classic enabler, but the folks in Al-Anon helped me see, I had to fix myself first, and then maybe they could fix her, or at least set the conditions for her to get better.
How do you feel about, there's a lot of, and I'm not an expert in this, so I always hesitate when I'm not expert to jump into a situation, but there's a lot of evidence that, drug companies very much knew that there was a significant threat of addiction, and yet, pushed hard to use these drugs instead of other drugs that have been used for years.
Right.
And now we're sitting on, a true crisis, and people, like your wife that, through no fault of their own, got exposed to these things, and then
She just couldn't get away from
couldn't
it.
get away from it.
Yeah.
And
the worst part is, she had to go to pain clinics, right? Because they could give you the quantity that you'd really need to keep the pain down. And methadone was her medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And as time went by, she needed more and more and more to do the thing, right?
Yeah.
And when that didn't do it, she then added alcohol So she had this vodka, and methadone, and then she even had fentanyl patches at one point, and it just, she went to rehab a couple of times. Twice it took for about a month, and I thought, we'd rounded the corner, and that's when she would tell me all the stuff she'd been doing. It's like, yeah, here's how I did this, and here's how I've been hiding this, and like, wow. So that's how I know. Otherwise, I'd never known what she was doing.
Have you put any thought, like, what do you think we should be doing with opioids? Like, how should we be approaching it? Should they be used? Should they be used only under extremely limited conditions? Like, because, people that haven't seen it think it's just willpower. And I'm not saying it isn't, but there is a physical addiction that is,
yeah.
and some people are, are more prone to being addicted than others. Some people, like my mom is, she's so fearful of these things that when she had double knee replacement, she took like pills for a day and was like, I'm just going to weather the pain now.
Yeah.
Because she she was so fearful of that. She's also, built a certain way, but then other people, like, it doesn't take much, and then they can't break it. And like, it almost seems like we kind of throw our hands up and like, oh, it's on them. But clearly everyone knows that this is a significant risk.
Well, I think that's the thing, is the awareness, right? Because back when she was doing this, the doctors were still prescribing, pain pills.
Yeah,
like
their
theory was no pain, not managing pain. It was like no pain.
Yeah.
Well, in order to do that, you really got to put somebody down.
Yeah.
And, that's the kind of thing. Had I, joined Al-Anon sooner, because I knew this was going this way, and I just thought we could fix it. And it wasn't until I got with this group of people who were in similar circumstances that I realized, maybe if this was a couple of years earlier, we might have been able to do something, but I don't know. We just. Do
you think we should use them?
Yeah, there's got to be a time for it. But so she was using it for chronic pain, right? Not just, an injury or a surgery. She had, osteoarthritis in her back and her hip. And I mean, things like that.
Which is miserable.
Well, she had, Vioxx actually was a non-narcotic that she was using, and that was keeping it, under control. And I talk about in the book that's the mark on the calendar where everything went to hell, because they took Vioxx off the market, and she had nothing else would touch the pain, so she had to go with narcotics, and that was it. That was the beginning of the end.
How do you, you have been through, both in your personal life and your professional life, significant trauma, whether you're talking about, getting shot down, watching people in terrible situations, Kazovac that didn't go the right way. How do you maintain, because you're a very positive, steadfast kind of person. How do you maintain that?
I don't know. I'm built that way. I try to surround myself with people who are like-minded, and I try to have fun. I have a wonderful wife. I have a coin that I made when I put the book out, and it's got an aircraft attitude indicator on the front of the coin.
I don't want to brag or anything, but I received one of those coins right before the show. In fact, here it is.
There you go. By the way, there's a little terrain falling radar cue on the edge of that there. But attitude is everything, is the way I view it. And try to surround myself with people that have a good attitude. And I've been lucky enough to do that. And if somebody's negative, if I can't bring them up, maybe distancing myself a little bit.
That's why we put Quigley at the end of the table.
We can work on that attitude. It'll be all right.
There is none.
There is no what?
No attitude.
No one believes
Well,
you.
you got to have
So
a good attitude.
No one believes you. If you were a wooden puppet, your nose would be growing right now, madam.
That's it. Pinocchio as a motivational speaker. I see potential in you.
So what advice would you give for somebody that wants to be like you when they grow up? They want to they want to become a pilot. They want to, they dream of being a night stalker. How would you do that?
I get that all the time. So actually, the 2 West Point cadets that I first met when on my assignment up there on the skydiving team both fly MH-47s for the 160th now.
Oh, wow.
And
Go you.
So I'm very proud of them.
Yeah.
But the advice I give anybody, right, and I get a lot of questions, hey, my kid wants to join the military, what do you suggest? And I'm like, okay, first of all, do they have something they want?
Mm-hmm.
No, they just want to join the military. All right. So there's 2 schools of thought for me. One is get a skill, get your college money, and get out. Right? Be a plumber, be a mechanic, whatever, and then go to college and get out. Or jump out of airplanes with your hair on fire, do it up,
Yep.
get your college money, and get out. Right? Either way, the intention is do whatever you're going to do and get out. Now, whether
you did not follow that rule, sir. Just
no,
so you know.
but like most people who stay in at least 20 years, what happens? You meet a woman, a spouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have a kid. All right, I'm getting out. Guess what comes next? Another kid, right? And those medical benefits and the pay is good. There's stability.
Mm-hmm.
Before you know it, you're past 12.
Yeah, but I don't believe you when you say that's why you stayed in. I don't believe you at all. Not even a little bit.
No, I just enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I mean, I really like flying. And actually, at 9 years, so I was aircraft mechanic in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did is I decided that I would put in for flight school. And if I got selected, I'd stay in. And if not, I would get out and just work for Boeing or Augusta or something like that, working on helicopters. I got accepted. And of course, there it went.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
And then you spent a Quigley and a half serving in the military.
Yeah. No, I really liked it. It was
Yeah.
good. I really, what I get asked all the time, do I miss flying? And the answer is not really.
Do you fly at all?
No, I don't.
You have no like.
I was
you don't-
telling Hollywood the problem with it is you got to keep up with the regulations, and it's tough.
and
It's tough having a real job and doing that, unless that
so
was
that's
the job.
not an itch that you need to scratch anymore.
No, like I renewed my skydiving license, although I didn't do it this summer because
Yep.
I haven't had the opportunity.
We're drone pilots.
We are drone operators.
It's just crazy to me. Like, I mean, you're one of the best pilots on planet Earth in a rotary wing aircraft.
Probably the best, but
Possibly the best. Possibly the best. We might be right now talking to the best pilot on planet Earth.
well, only if I grew the mustache back.
So
'cause,
we recently had Jack McCain on, and we have to have him on again because we had some technical difficulties. But he also, so he did not claim that he was the best pilot on Earth, but he did continue to claim many times that rotary pilots are far and above any other pilots, and that you're a different breed. So so that claim was made.
Yeah.
4 or 5 times.
But regardless of that, I don't necessarily miss the flying, although once in a while I'll drive across the George Washington Bridge just north of New York City. It'll be a beautiful day. You can look up and down the Hudson. And I think, I used to fly right across the top of this bridge. And I kind of miss it.
Do you think you'll fly again?
Nah, probably not.
That's wild.
But you know what I miss?
It's
I miss
wild.
I miss the people.
I think it bothers me more than it bothers you. I'm like, man.
I tell you what, when I met you at the book signing with Tim Kennedy down in Jersey,
Yep.
Tim told me he was taking flying lessons.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I got like 25 hours or whatever.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, that's cool. I got it like 7,000.
I remember that.
When you get up.
I remember that. Yeah. His friend, my friend as well, Shane Steiner, he was a country music star back in the day. Now he does, real estate and, rich guy stuff. But he loves flying. So he owns, I want to say, 4 helicopters.
Wow.
And so, so like whenever I visit Tim, like if we're going to the gym and Shane is involved, Shane doesn't really believe in driving anymore. So, he will fly, he'll fly over, land in Tim's backyard.
That's
we get
awesome.
on, we fly to the gym, and the gym is, we work out at Roca in Austin. So they're, if you know that they do sunglasses and some apparel. and they have a landing pad. So it's like Tim and Shane, their entire life basically revolves around places where you can land a helicopter. So it's
that's
like,
awesome.
it's like, hey, let's go eat at the Salt Lick. Like, why are we, I mean, it's phenomenal barbecue, but why are we going there? Because they can land a helicopter
That's
there.
nice.
So, yeah, I mean, a different world, but
No, I'll tell you,
super fun.
when I was at West Point, I would fly over from Stewart to the plane by myself for command and staff meetings. There every Tuesday, and there's no parking on West Point.
Yeah.
So my boss would say, "Al, why are you taking a helicopter over here?" It's like, because there's no parking, and I got to fly single pilot anyway, so I have to practice. So I'd fly over, I'd land next to Eisenhower, the statue on there, and the cadets, they would walk by like there's no helicopter. It's like, this is normal. I'd get out, lock the door, beep, beep.
Yeah, it's a weird place. It's a weird place that you never really recover from.
I bet. Well, luckily I didn't have to attend it. I just got
you just got to teach people. Yeah.
That was fun.
That's amazing.
Have you always been a writer? I mean, did you always feel this burning need to write? Is that how the book came about?
No, I'm a storyteller. The only reason I actually
You stole my line.
the only reason I wrote the book was because, I went back to school to finish my degree, and of course I had to write a lot of papers, and I realized I could write a longer, comprehensive work. And then I was interviewed by Jim DeFelice. He wrote American Sniper, and he was writing a book with the horse soldiers called Swords of Lightning that they've since put out. And he came to my work and he interviewed me. And when we were done, he's like, "Al, you should write a book. You got some good stories, and you tell a good story." And I'm like, "Oh, the community would hate me. There's always that fear that, look at like Rob O'Neill and Mark Ellen and stuff. Everybody's like, oh, they're telling the stories." But when 12 Strong came out and we were at the premiere, we're drinking horse soldier bourbon at the after party, and he goes, "Al, you got to write a book." And I'm like, Jim, I can't. I don't know how to write a book. He goes, "I'll help you."
You know what? Your book, though, is, I mean, don't get me wrong. The community definitely eats its own all the time. As soon as somebody gets any fame, at least 30% of people hate that person just because of that. So, like, I'm not saying that isn't a threat, but, this is not an I Love Me book.
No.
This is a book about...
And I have got a lot of support. The regiment's been great. I've got, a lot of the generals.
And you're a
are
good
getting the book.
writer, like when we met and you were like, "Yeah, I'm writing this book," I was like, "I don't know."
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's a really powerful book. You did a great job. So
Thank you.
congratulations.
I appreciate that.
Not only on the book, but on your success with it. And, word on the street is that there's a second book coming.
There is. I signed a contract for a second one. I'm outlining it now.
Yeah. So, did you ever anticipate, first of all, it's a monumental task to write a book, but, you do two in a row. Now you're an author, like you're a professional writer.
I like it.
The second one doesn't suck.
Yeah.
Even if it does suck, like
it won't. We try not to suck.
Yeah.
So
that is our.
And,
We're gonna sue.
If it doesn't
we will
work,
sue. I'm gonna hit the table, Teresa.
And if it doesn't work, we try again.
Yeah.
So
you have to like a guy that's obviously watched your shit. Obviously.
Hey, somebody has to, right?
Yeah. Well, me and my two friends, we have a little watching party.
Hey, that's two more friends than I have. Hollywood doesn't even like me.
I missed you terribly last week.
Yeah, I tell you, I had an opportunity, obviously talking to you at the beginning about some of the writer stuff. There's a gentleman named Don Bentley. He writes under the Tom Clancy name. He just picked up Mitch Rabb, and he has his own book as well. He was an Apache pilot at one time, and he was actually the Apaches chasing Turbine 3-3 to rescue, Luttrell and the guys, and when they originally got shot down. And so he and I hooked up, and he hooked me up with Jack Carr. So he and I went on.
He's a great guy,
super guy. But did
you do his podcast?
I did, yeah, with Don Bentley. So Don's the headliner. He's promoting his book, and then he bows out elegantly and leaves me for another hour to talk with Jack, which was a lot of fun. But what was really cool about it was like sitting through a master class. To talk to these guys talking about their writing process, the publishing process, their editors, the marketing. And then Dawn and I actually went out to the National Veterans Museum in Ohio. It was started by John Glenn, and we did a panel out there. And same thing. He gave me all these tips, and here's what you want to do in marketing, and the publisher won't do this, and it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'm always impressed with Jack's work because there are people that write, and there are people that do impeccable research and then write. And so, when you write fiction, and I've got like 2 half books. Fiction is very hard, right? It's very hard. When you write fiction, it's very easy to dream things up.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to think of the characters, and it's very easy to write big scenes, but to connect it all where the characters are believable throughout and they are true to themselves. But more importantly with him is the research necessary to understand, even if you disagree with his conclusions, the research necessary to understand the major geopolitical players for his books, because they are in depth, and he goes into topics like artificial intelligence. Right. He goes, the China, Russia, Serbia, like this is real research.
Hey,
this is real knowledge.
What's fun with him is, I was telling him on the podcast that I didn't grind any axes with this book. I've obviously had people I could have dimed out, and, bad leaders or, whatever, or peers that we may have fought. I didn't do that. I decided to take the high road. As a matter of fact, it was kind of funny when I narrated the audiobook, available on audible.com. I hit certain points in the book and I was like, oh, I could have sworn I took it a little harder on this guy, but I told Jack that. He's like, oh, I do it all the time. He goes, I can grind an axe. He says, because they're just fake names, but I can make a character.
Oh, yeah. He pictures the people that did him wrong. I mean, that's the way when you write fiction, you have to make it real. Otherwise the characters are wooden,
Right.
But I am with you. I'm in the school of, unless somebody was truly just atrocious, like we're all the heroes of our own story and we all see things differently. Most people, I say most people are not trying to fail.
No.
Most people wake up every morning saying like, I'm going to go win today. I'm going to do good today. And maybe, maybe they're not competent. Maybe they have a bad day. Maybe they think their version of good is different than mine. So when I was younger, I was very much a burn the ships kind of guy, like, fuck them all. Like, I don't care, but having lived more life, not as much life as you in Hollywood here, but, having, you realize you're not perfect and that, like, you're the villain in somebody's story too. And
right.
it's a lot easier to be a little more charitable with people.
Yeah. And I tell you, the guys, like you said, everybody's always trying to do the right thing for the most part.
Yep.
And, even though I had differences of opinion on how to do things, those guys were good. And I was just one of many guys just like me, right? I mean, I wrote a book, but there's guys that were still rowing the boat after I left.
100%.
And I do give them some attribution in the acknowledgments, and the crew chiefs, that's something we didn't talk about at all, is those guys are amazing. They're riding in the back. I'm taking them somewhere to a fight, and they're going along for the ride, and they've got a great attitude to boot, and it's nice when they want to fly with you.
Yep.
And
the other thing is you may have encountered people at a point in their career where they weren't quite good yet, where they were learning and like your example, like they became a totally different person.
Oh yeah.
So,
Well, remember I was talking about the guy that played baseball, came to the 160th, throwing like the 90-mile-an-hour dodgeball.
Yep.
So he assessed for the 160th right out of flight school. It's unlikely to happen just because unless you've got a Ranger or SEAL background or something like that. But the instructor that evaluated him said that guy will never be in the 160th, right? He just couldn't see the potential in this guy, right? So now this guy goes to Korea. He's going to get some time. They tell him to reassess when he comes back. Well, I go over. I'm the senior pilot in the 160th, and I'm going to do an evaluation for one of the guys. And we bring in conventional forces to give him some complexity in the operation. And one of them is this pilot. And everybody tells me, this guy's great. He got assessed, but so-and-so didn't like him, and he's not going to reassess. So I went and I flew along with him a couple of times. I was like, all right, the 160th guys in Korea like him. I've been watching him. I like him. So I called a recruiter and I said, hey, I want to do an assessment here in Korea, which has never been done before or after that. So I got permission from all the commands, did his assessment during the week, and did a board on the phone, and we took him. So he came back from Korea, went there. That guy not only became a flight lead in the 160th, he's now the senior warrant officer in the 160th, wow. You know, because I'd like to say I saw the potential in him, and you know, other people as well, but I was the one that pushed it.
Yeah.
You know, and
yeah, it's an interesting thing sometimes. And I saw this in my brief stint in corporate. I saw it in the military. Somebody makes a mistake or isn't quite ready for something one time, and people write that person off forever. Now, don't get me wrong. There are people that are just perpetual fuck ups that don't deserve additional chances. But, you know, a lot of times, like, failure becomes a catalyst for significant improvement, you know? And so it's always interesting to me where it's like, you know, we want people to charitably look at us and say, oh, well, Nick just made a mistake. He's a good guy. But, like, I might look at you and say, well, he made a mistake. He's a fuck up. Like, I always find that interesting. Now there's the other side of it. You can't be so charitable that you start keeping bad people around, right. which has been a challenge that I have. Is I give probably too many chances to people because I come from the old Army maxim: there are no bad soldiers, only bad leaders. But actually, there are bad soldiers.
No, there
you know,
are.
And I've learned that the hard way a few times. But you know, like. You have to have an environment where people can make mistakes and still achieve great success. And if you don't have that, like, you're essentially going to start encouraging people that are unwilling to take risk because one screw up and you're done in a number of organizations.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you think of like the, you know, in the tier 1 units, if you have a negligent discharge, you know, they're gone. Right. But it turns out really you're only gone for about a year, and then you can come back typically, depending on the circumstances. But you're gone, you know, for a period of time, and it's up to you to try to get back, you know. And, you know, I have friends who have crashed helicopters or had aerial refueling accidents where they hit, you know, the rotor blades into the drogue. And, you know, the command saw fit to, you know, retrain if they needed to, or, you know, did you learn something from this? And they got to stay and, you know, improved from that.
Sometimes it's just unavoidable.
Yeah.
I mean, we like to have big egos and think that, you know, sometimes you get into situations in the air and it's just going to happen no matter what you do.
Yeah. I mean, Hollywood crashed 8 planes.
8?
Did not crash 1. I crashed 3.
Let's start.
It's not that bad.
Let's start that rumor. Let's start the rumor that Hollywood crashed 8 planes.
But it's true, you know, and that's why if it's that hard line, you can lose great people if they don't have the opportunity to really assess or get another chance or retrain.
True.
It's the same thing in business. You know, Nick likes to say, well, I'm too lenient, but not usually. I mean, sometimes, but most of the time, you see a fuck up and you let, you know, the person learn from that, and that's what has to happen. Because like this guy you were talking about, maybe the instructor just didn't like him. Maybe he said something, you know, the instructor didn't like, and you guys would have lost a great asset if you hadn't had the opportunity for somebody else to put eyes on him.
Well, you know what's funny is after we accepted him, we were out at Dam Neck doing some dog training, right? So the dogs, the Belgian Malinois, they have to get accustomed to the aircraft. So you fly out there, you shut down, they walk on and off, then you run up, and then they walk on and off, then you fly, and then they fast rope with them and stuff like that. And this guy who had been the instructor was out there, had been the evaluator before, and he's like, "Oh, who's that?" And he goes, "Oh, that's Alan." I'm not going to say his name. And he's like, "Worst guy I ever saw," and he still couldn't see the potential in him.
Look, we don't live in medieval times anymore when a light breeze used to riddle a village with pneumonia, or stubbing your toe meant they would have to amputate your leg. We live in modern times, and we expect modern technology to solve our problems. So let me introduce Intublade. When a patient needs to be intubated, seconds matter. They desperately need oxygen going into their brain and into their system. And the number one thing that occurs when somebody is trying to intubate, even with tools that have cameras, is that there is something blocking the camera so that the surgeon, the doctor, the EMT cannot see where that tube is going. Enter Intublade. Intublade works with unrivaled efficiency and efficacy. Visit intublade.com for more information so you can see how their self-cleaning camera helps you intubate faster than you ever thought possible.
Which was too bad. Yeah. And I don't know why. I mean, I still don't know why. Because the guy is a super guy. Superman, almost.
Yeah.
Not quite.
But it happens all the time.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. Like, even, going through the writing process for Scars and Stripes, like, some of the people that knew Tim when he was 20 still think of him that way.
Right.
Like, oh, the cockstrong, like, doesn't listen to anybody, kind of.
Right.
Well,
but years have gone by.
He's in his 40s now.
Right.
And like all people, there has been a progression. He's an E8 now that has been, in group for a long, like
Right.
a lot has happened. He's not that guy, but I did a lot of interviews with people, and even had one, prominent guy basically refuse to interview because, like, he thought he was going to be villainized in the book, and actually that the opposite was true. Tim talked about all of the lessons that he learned by basically getting pummeled by this guy. And but it's interesting, like, people just have a snapshot of one moment in time. And don't get me wrong, like, if I meet somebody that's 40 and they're a certain way, I probably, they're probably not going to change, at the core. But
Right.
like 20s, like, they're getting, I don't even know who they are yet. They don't
Right.
even, they don't have reps. They don't know anything. Like, they don't know anything. So,
The hat's out.
hats out, hat time. All right. Is there,
If you're
before
ready.
we pull the hat out, is there anything that you wish I had asked you about that I have not asked you about?
No, I think we kind of covered it.
Got it?
Yeah.
All right. Razor 3, A Night Stalker's War. We're about to do the fast question round.
This is where it gets wild.
Let's see.
Uh-oh.
Let's see if these are the best questions you've ever put in here.
Probably not.
Probably not. All right.
Low
Well,
expectations, please.
Okay.
Don't forget the first question.
I won't forget the first question. I just like to get one ready, Hollywood.
Oh, I see.
See, I have one ready.
That way it's rapid.
Yeah. So you already know, because you watch the program, you already
Yeah.
know the first question. What is the toughest animal you think you could defeat in hand-to-hand combat?
I did put some thought into this. I'm saying a wiener dog, a Dachshund, but it can only be one. I can't do two or more because I will laugh so hard I will lose.
A wiener dog it is. That is the first time anybody has said a wiener dog. What is your go-to karaoke song?
Oh, well, I can't carry a tune in a bucket, but I get this thing I do for my wife. Bugs Bunny cartoon fans, anybody?
Yep.
Right? So when Bugs Bunny was on Broadway,
We need 10
He had a
seconds of it.
we're the boys of the chorus. We hope you like our show. We know you're rooting for us, but now we have to go. That's it.
I love it. That might be my favorite yet, right there. All right, here we go. What's the most interesting place you've ever been?
Afghanistan.
What's been your favorite age so far?
My early 30s, probably 32.
32.
Yeah.
What's the favorite book that you've read in the last 6 months, other than your own?
Scars and Stripes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boo.
What's your guilty pleasure or something you're embarrassed to admit that you like?
Huh. What am I embarrassed? I am a movie crier. If the movie is happy, like super happy, I
Yeah.
will cry. If
Yeah.
the movie is sad, I'm definitely going to cry. And so my wife will sit next to me and we'll watch some section of the movie that's obviously emotional.
Yeah.
And she'll just look at me. And I'm like, yeah.
What's the most ridiculous movie moment? I'm just adding this one that you cried to. Like something where like most people are not crying, but you're like,
I can't think of anything like that. I don't know.
did you cry during Top Gun Maverick?
Yeah, are you kidding? He had the moment where Rooster and Mav, they come together, but Goose.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
That brought tears to my eyes.
Really?
Yeah, I'm the same. I cry. I cry at every movie.
All right.
Yeah, we go to the theater. I have to have Kleenexes.
What's one job no one could pay you enough to do?
I'd say nobody could pay me enough to be a doctor.
Why is that? Usually we don't ask why, but
Well, think about it. You don't go to the doctor because you're healthy, right? It's
Yeah.
like, here, Mr. Proctologist, check out my whatever, or
Yeah.
check out these warts or whatever. It just,
Yeah. you're not into it.
I'm not into gross.
That's fair. What would be your weapon of choice in the zombie apocalypse?
I have a Mini 14 in 5.56. I really enjoy that rifle. Iron sights, Ruger. Yep. I really enjoy it.
That's
And I could take out some zombies with that. I mean, it's the A-team used it.
Yeah. I love it.
No, it's 5.56.
5.56.
Yeah. And it's got a regular stock, not the folding stock, like
Like the old M14.
All right. If you could invite 3 people to dinner, living or dead, who would you invite? This is our final question.
All right.
So you've got to bring it home.
George Washington,
Great one.
Abraham Lincoln, and Neil Armstrong, who's obviously none of us are with us anymore,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think those 3.
That's pretty strong.
Yeah.
Who do you think would lead that conversation?
George. No, actually, you know what? I think Lincoln would, because he was known for his storytelling and amiable attitude.
Do you know that both George Washington and Abraham Lincoln were exceptional wrestlers?
I did not know that. I know Lincoln was he would do demonstrations of strength.
Lincoln was allegedly, and obviously this is oral history, so who knows, but allegedly he was 301 in wrestling. 300 wins, 1 loss. And Washington used to do what is now referred to as catch wrestling, which is wrestling with submissions. And he was a perfect 17-0.
Wow.
So
He was a big guy, too.
he was a big guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a big dude. Sir, Mr. Mack of the Daddy Mack. It has been a pleasure to have you on the show. Guys, if you have not read Razor 03, A Night Stalker's Wars, you should. It's compelling. He's a great writer, which I did not expect, because he comes at you with a very stoic outlook. So I thought I was going to get a very stoic book, but there's a lot of emotion. Stellar book. You should read it. And if you're out there listening to this podcast or watching it, you should have this guy on your podcast. Super interesting, and there's a lot more where that came from. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Hey, thanks, Nick. It was a lot of fun. Thanks, you guys.
Julia did
Welcome.
nothing today. If you guys noticed, she's supposed to actually ask questions and stuff, but she just sat there.
I was so enthralled. It was so hard.
You
I was
know,
just like, wow.
She just sat there and did nothing. So, Mom, I know you think she's great, but not so great today. Was she, Mom?